Hey guys, tonight we step out of your room and into air that smells of wet grass and warm resin, under a sky so star-thick it feels like the ceiling was pulled away. You're standing at the edge of a Miocene night bronze grass, hissing thorn trees, scratching the moon cicadas, sowing a soft electric hum. Quick reality check. You probably won't survive this. No antibiotics, no phone signal, and your shoes are not saber-tooth approved, so we'll move gently and borrow the dark, like respectful guests. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what your local time is. I love seeing the map of night owls light up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You draw a breath and taste dust, powdered by hooves and padded paws you can't yet name. The night is roomy, generous, indifferent. Our premise is simple and a little ruthless. Somewhere earlier in the story, your lineage ended. No Homo, no Australopithecus. Not even those crafty tool-curious cousins who might have tested a sharp flake against a tuber. Without you, nothing gets carved into permanence. No hearths, no middens, no footprints in volcanic tuff becoming exhibits. You're here as a quiet ghost in a world that never needed a witness. Your eyes adjust. Off to your right, something glides like a shadow deciding to be muscle. A Macarodont cat, one of the saber-tooths, moves with the heavy grace of a secret. It pauses, draws a line of breath through your scent, and strolls on because confusion isn't appetizing. A string of fireflies pulses along a dry ditch like a tiny runway, and for a heartbeat, you think of airports and duty-free snacks. Light joke one, the only carry-on allowed tonight is the panic you keep trying to stow under the seat in front of you. Here's a handhold for your sleepy brain. The Miocene stretches from about 23 to 5.3 million years ago. A long chapter of cooling climates and spreading grasslands. That's your mainstream fact, tucked in your pocket like a smooth stone. Mountain ranges, especially the Himalaya shoulder higher, winds shift, monsoons reorganize, coastlines scribble new margins. You can't feel the plates move with your toes, but the sky knows pushing and pulling the air as if to whisper, keep walking. Brush your fingers along a shrub, and it snaps back armed with thorns, perfumed with alkaloids, lettered by mouths that have learned to read it. Three-toed horses pick their way through the farther dark like courteous ghosts. Somewhere, a hyena splits a bone. The crack is clean as a breadstick. Overhead, the Milky Way pours a white river across thorn crowns. Light joke 2. You reach for your phone to take a photo. Remember the whole no civilization thing and pretend you meant to practice mindfulness anyway. From the gallery, forest a chorus flickers, churs, barks, whistles, the gossip of primates. Follow the sound and you'd find cousins with names that feel like spells whispered over embers. Dryopithecus in Europe, Sivapithecus in Asia, with an orangutanish air. Auranopithecus prowling Greek hillsides. They grip leap-test fruit with suspicious teeth. You are not their destination. Historians still argue whether the human-chimpanzee split sat near 7 million years ago, or stretched back toward 10 to 13, which tonight feels like a debate about a door that never opened. Here's a quirky tidbit to tuck behind your ear. Some researchers describe a late Miocene ape Danuvius that may have practiced tree walking, mixing upright hind limb support with careful handholds like a tightrope artist who never gets promoted to sidewalks. If that experiment spreads among cousins, it stays here, poured back into leaves and shadows. Tool curiosity flickers and fades like the fireflies, bright charming, under no obligation to become electricity bills. Water tugs you as it tugs everything alive. You drift toward a pale oxbow where frogs keep time. Reeds comb your shins. Across the slow gleam, two Dinother's elephant relatives with tusks curving down like commas wade through a scatter of stars. A calf thrums a note you feel in your sternum before you notice the sound. In another timeline, someone would tell this as an ancestor story around a hearth. Here, it simply happens and dissolves like breath on cool glass. You keep to a game trail, a compromise hammered by many hooves. Termite mounds stud the ground like small citadels, perfectly ventilated by a genius that doesn't need blueprints. You want to give them an architecture prize, but the committee hasn't evolved, and termites don't do speeches. The deeper rule of the night reveals itself. Without us, the world isn't kinder or crueler. It's precise. Fires still come, started by lightning, and stitched into the calendar of grasses. Rains still forget appointments. Rivers still move furniture when no one's looking. Wind slides across your neck flavored with sage ozone and something decidedly mammalian. Eyeshine blooms 2 coins at shoulder height. You meet the stare, then lower your gaze, because humility is older than language. The animal melts back into grass, and your lungs release a paragraph you didn't know you were holding. Light joke 3. You solemnly promise never to complain about squeaky grocery carts again. If the universe will kindly keep everything with fangs on the do not disturb setting. Far away in time from this exact evening, the Miocene will end with the Messinian salinity crisis, the Mediterranean nearly drying into stair-step basins of salt before the Atlantic kicks the door back in. You won't be there to argue over dates or to waggle finger bones at cross-bedded deposits. The planet will keep writing anyway. Your absence doesn't stop geology any more than your presence ever could. You test your breathing until it slows to match the insects. The soundscape stacks into layers. Frog pulse, leaf scratch, hoof tap, wind drag, owl syllable. You feel a calm that isn't safety so much as participation. If dawn found you here, light would pour warm tea through the acacias, and vultures would write cursive in the bright. But we keep the scene dark and restful. You are a hush between events. You let the hush lengthen and notice how the world carries meaning without asking your species for permission. The grass leans, the owl resets its call. Somewhere far off, a river rearranges its sand, as if practicing for a coastline it will someday meet. You tuck your hands beneath your head and watch the Milky Way climb an ancient bright thread, stitching a sky that needs no mending. Then you rise soft-footed and move on. Deliberate, curious, small, through a night that runs on its own clock, in a story that continues smoothly without you, and somehow feels no less beautiful for it. You step off the game trail, and the night rearranges itself into a quieter map. Tree trunks, like columns, lianas, drooping like forgotten ropes, the floor quilted in the slow paperwork of leaves. If our family tree is pruned at the root, snipped before anything called Australopithecus can try a cautious stroll, the canopy keeps its own minutes. The primates don't mourn missing cousins. They redistribute possibilities. You hear it in howls and soft hoots in the wet rip of fruit. The air smells tannic and green like tea, steeped too long in a wooden cup. Up ahead, a small parliament of monkeys convenes at first light. Baboons posture on a boulder, canines bright as dawn. A gelada-style grazer idles nearby, lips deft over grass blades slick with dew. You watch the social calculus thicken alliances, feints, reconciliations. Joking aside, you give the meeting a 10 out of 10 for drama and a 2 out of 10 for timekeeping. Someone clearly forgot to send a calendar invite because, again, no calendars. With your branch gone, These old-world monkeys cercopithecids in a shawl of latinate dignity press deeper into open savanna, widening the daylight kingdom that timid apes might have split with us. A mainstream fact to keep your feet on the path by the late Miocene apes had spread across Africa and Eurasia. More than 40 genera once browsed, leapt, and dangled their way through warm forests before many lines dwindled as climates cooled and grasslands expanded. That's the geologic stage dressing. You can still hear the rustle of it. In this story, the primates that survive keep their clever hands busy. Without us turning curiosity into compulsion strategy, flowers where it's useful and withers where it's not. You ease beneath a fig tree and feel the ground thrum a low, chesty murmur rolling through trunks. Gorillas, wide-chested as doorways, treat the understory like a breakfast bar. A silverback notices you the way a mountain notices. Weaned it registers, then goes back to being inevitable. His family fans out fingers weighing leaves as precisely as jewelers. Quirky tidbit for your pocket: wild gorillas sometimes hum or sing while feeding a soft, contented croon that feels like the forest humming back. You catch a ribbon of sound that could be that song, or could be your breath remembering to loosen. The border of forest and grassland flickers with dilemmas. Chimps comb fruiting trees like patient librarians, and where trees thin, they brave the edges, picking termites with grass stems and whacking nuts against flat stones. Your ghost self kneels eye level with a juvenile twisting a leaf into a poor excuse for a spoon, and you feel the tug of what might have been. In the world you came from, people named these behaviors, measured them, drew comparisons to kindergarten. Here, the work registers only as survival and culture, small local inherited in hands and eyes. Paleoanthropologists still argue whether knuckle walking in gorillas and chimps evolved once in a shared ancestor or twice in parallel. Out here, knuckles touch earth with the practiced grace of a promise kept daily. You drift east, hopping time zones like river stones. Asia lifts toward you in the smell of resin and rain. Orangutans move through lowland forest like thoughts slow, careful, never wasted. A female stops, folds a broad leaf into a passable umbrella, and continues water, pattering politely off her improvisation. Joking aside, too, you silently award her Best DIY at Fashion Week Borneo edition, and she accepts by ignoring you completely. Orangutans once ranged from Java to southern China. In this version, with no people chewing at their forest edges, their archipelago stretches wider, populations braided by corridors of green. Gibbons begin their duets, bright silver notes stitched into morning. Their arms are poems refusing punctuation. You follow the braid of song along a ridge where clouds sit in the pines like tired doves. Somewhere in buried layers of time, scientists will name a late Miocene ape Danuvius and debate whether its extended limb clambering was a foreshadow of bipedal balance. Here, no one files the paper. Trees simply receive the next cautious step. Historians still argue whether the orangutan lineage split from the African apes around 12 to 14 million years ago, or drifted away earlier. The forest doesn't answer, but the spacing of calls across the valley feels like a chart you could almost read. Back on the African side of your wandering, you pause where river meets sand. Crab-eating macaques patrol a tidal flat, faces set in that permanent expression of curiosity mixed with skepticism. One lifts a stone and taps a shell with crisp economy. In your other life, people documented stone tool traditions in macaques of coastal Thailand. Here the hammers don't become exhibits, they become grandparent stories told with gestures and shared afternoons. Quirky side note within a tidbit, a youngster tries to eat the hammer, is dissuaded, and immediately pretends it meant to groom the rock instead, which is frankly a mood. You keep the termites from section 1 in mind, architects with no need for applause, and stand before a different kind of civic project. A chimp toolkit cached under a tree, sticks frayed into brushes, husks of cracked nuts, a rock with a personality dented into it. Without us to introduce metal, this is still industry, still inheritance. Joking aside 3, you consider leaving a sticky note that says, "Great work. Have you tried user testing?" And then remember that sticky notes are made of a future that never happened. On the slopes that taste of bamboo and cloud, a troop of colobus monkeys eats with the precision of monks. Their stomachs are laboratories for leaf chemistry. Riverine forests elsewhere carry proboscis monkeys with noses like small sailboats, leaping into mangroves with the slap and splash of confident acrobats. The primate world isn't a rehearsal for us. It's a constellation of unrelated solutions. That's the gentle burn you feel. Your absence doesn't flatten the variety. It amplifies it by removing a particularly disruptive cousin. Somewhere in your chest, you still want a "what replaces us?" answer, a successor with cities, a late-night radio host, someone to invent squeaky grocery carts so you can feel normal again. But the forest insists on specificity. Intelligence is already present in corvids, who will get their own section later in elephants trading maps of waterholes inside low rumbles, in dolphins carving knots of air. Among primates, it expresses as social nuance tool traditions and quiet experiments that go as far as they need and not an inch farther. A honeyguide bird calls from the brush. In the world, you knew people and honeyguides sometimes cooperated birds, leading humans to hives. People leaving wax as payment. Here, honey badgers and other mammals play that role, and the birds' ancient partnership shifts not vanished, but recalibrated. A mainstream anchor to mark this clearing. The East African rift has been stretching and breaking for tens of millions of years, creating lakes and highlands that mosaic habitats and feed diversity. You feel that shape under your feet. The pull-apart basins that braid grassland to woodland so that chimps can risk a dash and monkeys can retreat to branches and leopards can be in exactly 2 places at once the moment you blink. In such mosaics, our absence means no controlled burning, no gardens, no silent theft of corridors by roads. Paths remain animal-sized, winding political in a non-human way. Paleoanthropologists still argue whether fossils like Sahelanthropus or Orrerin were truly hominins or just ambitious apes playing at uprightness. In tonight's version, those silhouettes never cast their shadow forward. The lines simply phrase into cousins who keep their own hours. And yet, as you watch a chimp mother teach a child to fish termites, patience wrapping around them like a shawl, you feel history happening small, local, durable. Culture doesn't require textbooks. It requires afternoons that repeat. The sun climbs the fig crowns, and the cicada hum becomes a kind of blanket. You trace a loop back toward last night's runway of fireflies, and pass a baboon troop on the move, shoulders rolling like a tide. One juvenile carries a stolen seed pod and pretends it's too heavy to return, huffing dramatically. You nod, fully supportive of creative cardio. In a clearing, littered with cracked shells and pounded stones, you kneel and press your palm to a boulder warmed like a loaf. If no human ever discovers this place, it still has a name in the patter of feet and the rhythm of visits. The stone is a memory palace, just not yours. You stand, brush leaf dust from your knees, and feel how the canopy writes its minutes. With your branch pruned, the family tree doesn't look empty. It looks rebalanced. Gorillas carry thunder in their chests and gentleness in their brows. Chimpanzees braid afternoons into generational craft. Orangutans edit the rain with leaves. Monkeys host meetings that never adjourn, and somehow achieve everything necessary. The forest doesn't ask for a king. It runs on agreements that smell of sap and sound like breath. You take one last look at the fig its roots like an old hand gripping the earth and step back onto the trail, carried forward by a world that has always known exactly what to do with itself. You follow the breeze out of the trees and feel the planet switch lungs. The air thins, cools, grows mineral like it passed over a glacier you can't yet see. The ground under your feet isn't just dirt. It's a dimmer switch for forests and grasslands, a ledger where rain writes margins and wind erases them. Without our smoke, the earth still breathes on schedules older than stories. It inhales, cold exhales warmth, and keeps an impeccable calendar, even though nobody invented paper. You stand there, a quiet hitchhiker, and the sky changes gear. Grass whispers with a different accent. See four grasses, those sun-hardened blades that thrive in heat and light spread, as carbon dioxide dips and seasonality sharpens late in the Miocene. Hooves answer with new enamel, and ruminants tune their stomachs to the new rhythm. You taste the switch in the dust, brighter, drier, a little like tea gone bold. Lakes gather, then wander off. Rivers forget their beds and wake somewhere else as if they rolled over in sleep. Your firefly runway from the first night glows faintly behind you. Ahead, thunder mutters its long thesis. The planet slides toward the Pliocene, then the Pleistocene, and the breathing deepens. Here's your mainstream anchor, the kind you can fold and keep in your pocket around 2.58 million years ago. The Pleistocene begins, and with it, the great glacial, interglacial metronome, paced by slow changes in Earth's orbit and tilt. Ice sheets grow like careful handwriting, then blur at the edges, then retreat into the mountains to rest. Milankovitch cycles do their unhurried choreography, eccentricity strolling on 100,000-year legs, obliquity swaying with a 41,000-year tilt precession, twirling the seasons around the calendar. You can't see the math, but you can hear the tempo in the wind. No one builds factories, so there's no sudden surge of greenhouse gas to jam the metronome. Winters still muscle south, summers still lift north. Coastlines advance and retreat like sleep tide. Sea level can fall the height of a 12-story building when ice is king, then rise again when ice loosens its grip. In low sea stands, shawls of land stitch continents together. The Bering Land Bridge spreads its brown ribbon, and Sundaland ties Borneo, Java, and the Malay Peninsula into one breathing platform. Light joke one, you try to open a travel app, and it just hands you a pair of walking calves and says you're welcome. Across the Atlantic, the Earth flips another quiet switch. The isthmus between the Americas finishes welding shut during the Pliocene. That narrow ridge persuades currents to loop north in the Atlantic, deepening the Gulf Stream's long sigh. Moisture heads into high-latitude snow, decides to stay for the winter, and ice sheets enjoy the invitation. Paleoclimatologists still argue whether this closure, Himalayan uplift amplifying monsoons, or a slow drawdown of atmospheric carbon, the handiwork of weathering rocks and industrious plankton, did the lion's share of coaxing ice into its Pleistocene confidence. You shrug in the pleasant way you do when three true stories harmonize. Rain learns different songs. The African monsoon steps forward and back, breathing the Sahara, from desert to savanna, and back again. Lakes bead across the desert floor during green intervals, shorelines curling like commas, then later wink out, leaving stranded beaches and quiet salt. Quirky tidbit for your travel notebook. dust from an ancient lake bed in the central Sahara rides the wind clear across the Atlantic and fertilizes the Amazon's trees. Even without us, the Amazon still drinks the Sahara's powdered memory. The partnership is older than passports. Wildfire keeps its stitched place in the calendar. Lightning throws a match, grasses bow woodlands, step back, and then step forward in the first wet weeks. The smell is clean resin and rain and ash, like a polite handshake. You remember the termite citadels from earlier, still cool inside, because physics loves them, and you grin at how these little masons adapt to every season without filing permits. Historians still argue whether ancient people once used fire to paint the edges of grasslands around the world. Here, nobody argues, and flames answer only to wind and water. You sit on a granite shoulder and watch time move in obvious ways. Glaciers advance down valleys like slow blue cats, sanding mountains, leaving crescents of rock dust and scuffed bowls that will hold new lakes. When they retreat, you can hear the crack and sigh of ice, releasing rivers, 1,000 glass panes breaking into braided silver. In those mild, summer-lipped interglacials, forests lean north and climb slopes. Birds root around last year's snowbones, and shorebirds discover new maps on newborn coasts. Light joke 2. You consider inventing a weather forecast, but all you can honestly say for the next 100,000 years is bring layers. Without our factories, ships, and cities, oceans stay closer to their old music. Acidification still waxes and wanes with carbon cycles, but there's no sudden, modern lurch. Coral reefs drown when seas rise too fast, then refound themselves like cautious towns stepping landward by the width of a generation. Kelp forests comb cold shelves into emerald gardens. Great whales sing into a quieter sea. The only low-frequency thunder is distant surf and the occasional underwater landslide clearing its throat. You visit a coastline at what would be called a last glacial maximum in your old world. The beach is much farther out. The continental shelf is a breezy plain where dune grass tries its luck. Rivers slice canyons into the exposed shelf, engraving letters that the next sea level rise will blur into estuaries. You walk the future floor of a bay and try not to think about forgetting your umbrella. Light joke 3. A gull yells at you with the exact tone of a disappointed barista, and you promise to tip the next wind gust extra. Then you're pulled inland by the promise of water. High plateaus collect snow like patient savers. Lowlands turn that savings into floodplains and meanders. In some interglacials, the Sahara greens up. In others, it doubles down on silence. Southeastern Asia breathes too when seas fall. Tropical islands join hands and share tigers and tapirs. When seas rise, the hands let go, and each island edits its own chapter. The variability is the point, and also the lullaby. The planet isn't calm because it doesn't change. It's calm because the changes have rhythm. On a chill night, beneath an aurora, you feel how voltage in the sky answers to solar moods that our species never learned to measure in this timeline. The green ribbon combs the dark, and geese wing through the quiet with magnetite compasses in their skulls. In another life, you might have worried about satellites, light pollution, airplane lanes. Here, navigation returns to old instruments. Stars scent coastline, the gossip of wind over reeds. The Milky Way is back to being a road without traffic. You crouch over a patch of ground where the soil exhales petrichor rain's perfume, courtesy of soil bacteria, making geosmin the instant drops arrive. That smell is its own calendar entry, a note that says, seeds wake. Termites seal doors. Antelopes find the slope that drains first. The Earth's meetings never need a memo. And you feel that funny human itch, the urge to label, to model, to predict. Settle into something more comfortable. You don't need a 5-day forecast. You need a patient back and shoes that don't squeak. A quick step back through deep time. In the late Miocene, the Mediterranean nearly dries. The Messinian salinity, crisis stacking salt like layer cakes before the Atlantic, returns gushing through the Strait of Gibraltar in a flood so astonishing you can almost hear the door slam open. That event leaves scars that later rivers will admire and ignore in equal measure. The earth can be flamboyant, but it prefers habits. After the spectacle, back to the metronome. So the planet keeps its appointments. Ice rehearses. Rain edits margins. Dust delivers letters. Seas write and erase their signatures. With no Anthropocene spike, no sudden fever from our chimneys and tailpipes, the breathing stays wide and slow. Interglacials, like the one you used to call Holocene, come and go, green windows opening and closing, without agriculture stapling them open. Coasts and forests move to music that doesn't care for clocks. And you, small alert, a polite ghost, learn to keep time by the tempo of frogs after rain, by the angle of sun on the shoulders of grass, by the hush that follows thunder when the earth has finished saying its piece. You crest a low ridge where the grass lies flat like brushed velvet, and the morning spreads a gold sheet over everything that runs or pounces. Without our bright metal and louder opinions, the predator guilds stand taller, talk openly with claws, and hold their meetings at dawn. You crouch behind an old termite citadel. Remember those air-conditioned architects, and watch a negotiation unfold in muscle and dust. Downslope lions pour out of shade like spilled ink. They are confident in a way you rarely saw before. No trucks, no spotlights, no distant crack of rifles that teach caution. A flank of lionesses fans left. On the right, spotted hyenas idle like grim comedians laughing at a joke they intend to finish. In the middle, the real tacticians, African wild dogs, lace the plain with their long-distance geometry ears like radar dishes, breaths, measured like metronomes. Mainstream fact: to hang on to wild dogs are famously efficient hunters compared with big cats, often succeeding far more often because they cooperate like a choir that knows its parts. The antelopes know it too. Their ears keep swiveling toward those painted runners. You pick out the drama inside the herd. Dominant females push to the center. Yearlings mill at the edges. A few old gazelles pretend their joints don't click. Classic, I can totally outrun the apocalypse energy. Light joke 1. Somewhere in a parallel universe, an antelope is starting a fitness vlog called Nope, I'm Not Lunch. And you would totally subscribe if you had Wi-Fi and a spare minute between heartbeats. Without human hunting pressure, the arms race intensifies on both sides. Predators practice boldness in daylight. Prey practice paranoia as a group sport. Horns curl heavier. Vigilance rules expand. Escape routes are memorized like lullabies. A quarry bustard rises with the dignity of an elevator, and every eye flicks to the moving horizon line. Predators read birds like footnotes. Historians still argue whether the pronghorn's absurd speed in North America evolved to escape an American cheetah or an ensemble of other sprinting killers. Either way, you watch a living thesis defend itself every time hooves drum the dust. Slide your gaze north, and the palate cools. Eurasian steppe, wind writing short sentences in feather grass, hosts wolves braided into winter. Without us, they trail ungulate rivers, more openly switching prey through the year, the way a careful chef changes menus. Red deer stamp the snow into Morse code. Saiga antelopes, noses like soft tea cozies, vanish into rippling heat later in the season. In birch edges, Lynx walk like rumors. A fox tests the air and turns the way. A question turns toward an answer. Quirky tidbit for your pocket: California ground squirrels, when confronted by rattlesnakes, can heat up their tails and wave them, exploiting the snake's infrared vision. An optical trick you mentally file under prey, doing science without grants. It's the sort of stunt you start seeing everywhere once you look: stotting gazelles, zigzagging hares, kangaroo rats, foot drumming at snakes like "Sir, I'm aware of you." The step relaxes into forest, and then, because the earth breathes big, into a North American plain where wind is always rehearsing for a thunderstorm. Bison move like portable hills. In your old world, dire wolves, American lions, and short-faced bears once patrolled here. In this one, the guild stays crowded and the etiquette is sharper. Coyotes stick to craft and caution. Cats own the twilight. Eagles write capital letters on the sky. You notice pronghorn lifting their white rump flags to broadcast alarm. Those signals travel faster than any one set of hooves. Light joke 2. If you had a tail flag, you'd be flashing all caps right now too, because every bush seems to rustle with an auditioning carnivore. On a salt pan that remembers yesterday as if it were a century ago, you kneel by a line of prints, delicate, candid, ovals, big cat commas, a bear's exclamation points. The vocabulary of pursuit and escape is written here cleanly because no roads erase it, no fences redirect it, no bait lines confuse the grammar. A jackrabbit bounces, once, twice, commits to a weird angle that makes your knees ache in sympathy and vanishes. Drops south, and air grows green and wet. An Amazonian understory, humid as a greenhouse perfumed with leaf rot and spice, the jaguar's sentence ends with a period shaped like a rosette. Tapirs move with the mass and grace of a quiet bus. Capybaras cluster like a sofa that discovered it has feelings. Harpy eagles carry a stare that says, "I am what people think dragons were," a mainstream anchor to ground your awe. The harpy is among the world's largest eagles, by body mass, able to lift prey nearly its own weight. You watch one fold the forest into a private stage and exit with applause made only of leaves. Somewhere at a river bend, piranhas change the water's punctuation for a minute and then go back to commentary. The cat and mouse in the canopy gets its own subplots. Tamarins with mustaches police the mid-levels. Howler monkeys fog the morning with bass notes that sound like distant surf. Ocelots ghost between lianas. Poison frogs advise everyone to mind their palates. Mobbing cries alert more species than you can count in a minute. The absence of us doesn't make the forest kinder. It keeps the rules consistent and local. Predators are honest because they can't afford to lie. Prey are skeptical because that's what survival feels like in 1,000 tiny muscles. Far across Blue Water Island, games play by different rules. New Zealand wears clouds like shawls, and the wind tastes faintly of honeyed grass. In upland shadows, a giant eagle stoops, wings broad legs like sprung traps. You remember from museum afternoons that Haast's eagle was the largest eagle known, built for crushing bone and imagination. With no people to scissor the food web, its shadow still writes fear on the backs of moa. The moa answer not with speed. They are mountains that walk, but with vigilance and terrain, threading forests so tight a wingtip must think twice. Light joke 3. You glance up, suddenly aware that your haircut is not aerodynamic, and make a mental note to avoid bald hilltops until gravity and talons lose interest. On smaller islands, the Komodo dragon patrols with a tongue that tastes the air's gossip. Pigs root macaques, steal deer, try very hard not to jingle. The lizard's patience is a cathedral. In front of it, goats are sermon notes. Offshore seabird colonies glow like snow fallen in the wrong season, and skuas work the edges with the charm of street magicians. Fosters rule. The island habit of giants becoming small, and small things getting big, plays out with a director's sense of humor. Pygmy elephants on one island, kingly rats on another. Predators recalibrate, owls bulge into ogres, snakes get ambitious, mongooses revise their resumes. Across Australia, night smells like eucalyptus coins left in your pocket. A shadow with a pouch leaves triangular signatures on sand. The thylacine, a quiet striped hypothesis of a wolf. With no people to demand proof of innocence, it keeps its territories and its bad press to itself. Qualls hopstock. Dunnerts sprint like punctuation marks. Wedge-tailed eagles ride thermals that hum like taut strings. The old marsupial lion is a rumor that may still patrol stone country in this timeline's deep pockets ambush, written into its arms and jaw. Historians still argue whether climate swings alone or a duet with human arrival explained Pleistocene losses here. Without us, the argument changes shape, but the land's script of stealth and dash carries on. Back in Africa, you revisit the water hole where all terms are renegotiated. Crocodiles, armored like ancient treaties, hold their half of the document. Hippos critique loudly at sundown, and then write essays in the water all night. Jackals nip at the edges like footnotes, occasionally stealing an entire paragraph. You notice an old buffalo with the look of a retired general. His scars are minutes from a lifetime of meetings with lions. A cattle egret rides his back and blinks, as if to say, "I know a good vantage point when I see one." The arms race never ends. It only oscillates. Hornbill alarms teach antelope ears new verbs. Leopard dragnets teach baboons to sleep in thornier bedrooms. Wolf selections nudge elk to choose different valley floors, which lets willow and aspen breathe, which invites beavers to put their carpentry exam back on the calendar. You can watch trophic cascades happen at the pace of seasons instead of policy cycles. Without us, intimidation comes in tooth and stare, not in paperwork and wire. Night arrives with that old fan hum from Section 1, and you realize how the world's danger sings you to sleep rather than keeps you from it. Everything out here is busy being precise. Nobody is busy being evil. You lean against the termite tower that has watched countless chases pass, and the clay holds the day's warmth like a loaf cooling on a sill. In the near-dark eyeshine blinks cat antelope, something curious. You don't reach for a camera. You listen for foot drums, for wing scolds, for the harrier's low stitch above grass. The arms race sharpens the edges of life. Yes, but it also conducts the orchestra that makes the plane hum. You let the music sort your breath into smaller pieces, and when you open your eyes again, the stars have moved their paragraphs a little to the left. You doze a little against the warm clay of the termite tower and wake to a smell that isn't there. No wood smoke, no coffee, no sweet edge of bread going bronze. The world reminds you kindly, but firmly, no hearths, no ovens, no breakfast. You stand, and the grass leans aside like bead curtains, and something gray moves with a logic you can feel in your bones. Wolves still. Wolves flow through the low light, hung together by breath and intention, not by leashes or names from a license tag. They don't shadow camps because there are no camps. They don't learn leftovers because there are no middens blooming with bones and porridge skins. Their map is wind and hoof, and the old roads between water and shade. In the world, you remember dogs were the first domestic experiment, mainstream fact worth tucking into your sleeve. Archaeological remains show Dog domestication by at least 15,000 years ago. Likely earlier, the beginning of a partnership that braided our scavenged scraps to their patience for us. Here, that braid never forms. The pups born tonight will learn from their aunts to read snow and angle a chase, not to read your eyebrows and harvest your praise. Light joke 1. You try a tiny piss, good boy, just to see, and a wolf glances at you the way a librarian glances at crunchy snacks respectfully, but with firm boundaries. You trail them long enough to feel their calculus. They test the wind for elk switch to a river corridor when the air tastes like cold stone, share the labor of being first foot in deep grass. Ravens mark the route above black punctuation, drifting from claws to claws. Quirky tidbit: ravens and wolves are old colleagues. Ravens often lead wolves to carcasses and dine better for it, while wolves get aerial reconnaissance and alarm calls for free. No bowls, no collars, just a deal written in hunger and wing shadow. Step sideways, and the chorus of ungulates you've been hearing becomes a parliament of the unconquered. Aurochs, the wild cattle, behind every pasture daydream move like bold syntax across a meadow, high-shouldered, horned like parentheses that never close. Without herders, they keep their temper, their migration, and their preferred geometry of woodland and open glade. Wisent grind paths through beach that grow back like hair. Wild horses skitter like rain over shale. Nobody stalls them, shoes them, or braids their manes for fair days. Historians still argue whether the earliest horse domestication centered on milk riding or traction. Bowtie yurts on the step, dreams on the wind. But in this script, the wild herds continue writing their own footnotes from river to ridge. Plants keep their private contracts too. The wild wheats, einkorn, and emmer still shatter at maturity, letting seed heads rain into soil instead of staying put for harvest. That brittle rachis, the stubborn hinge, never gets selected for. Please stay attached until someone's basket arrives. Barley stays, a patient, glassy little arrow. Teosint, the wiry ancestor of maize, keeps its tight armored kernels. Nobody chooses the chance mutants with softer, bigger cobs and says, yes, more of that, please. Rice spreads its silk in monsoon shallows and falls back into silt at its own pace. No terraces stitch hillsides into green stairs. Your hands itch with a phantom, wanting the grasp and rub and toss of winnowing under a hot noon. And the wind winnows instead, indifferent and excellent. With no granaries, the village of who moves in with us stays small. House mice never write their lease in your walls. Black rats don't take passage in your grain. Pigeons remain cliff artists and sea ledge traditionalists rather than city fountain philosophers. African wildcats continue their quiet, solitary business, striping shadows and hunting where they like. No one ever decides that saucers of milk and a bed by the window are attractive career changes. Chickens stay jungle fowl, dappled, quick, wonderfully nosy, but not pinned to courtyards by the promise of midday feed. Camels remain arguments with the desert rather than arguments with merchants. Llamas and alpacas remain highland gossip, not caravan accountants. Light joke 2. You glance at your wrists and realize there is no smartwatch counting your steps, but the pronghorn has been judging your cardio since dawn anyway. Disease narratives fork quietly. Without barns and corrals that mix species and monotone the landscape, many of the famous human plagues never audition. In your other timeline, measles likely evolved from rinderpest, a cattle virus that found a city-sized audience. Smallpox's deep origins sit in a thicket of related pox viruses. Influenza loves to workshop new material where ducks, geese, and pigs mingle. Here, those rehearsals happen, but the stage is smaller. Wild populations flare and fade, and outbreaks burn out in the geometry of space and the honesty of distance. Yersinia pestis still rides fleas on wild rodents and occasionally rearranges the map for carnivores and scavengers, but without caravans, ports, and close brick neighborhoods, there is no Black Death. No long ledger of door knocks and church bells. The world stays sneeze honest and village-sized because there are no villages. Farming doesn't vanish. It simply returns to its oldest guilds. Leafcutter ants practice fungus agriculture with the unshowy brilliance of someone who has been doing it for tens of millions of years. Their ventilated domes and cut leaf supply chains are the envy of any project manager you've ever met. Termites continue their cool palace engineering. Remember your air-conditioned architects tending microbial gardens that turn dead plant into living city. Bowerbirds redecorate with chromatic theory. Beavers raise water with the confidence of seasoned hydrologists. Light joke 3. If there were a county fair, the blue ribbon for best silo would go to a fungus chamber, and the judge would be an ant who takes notes with her antennae. Without pastures, fire follows grasses instead of fences. Without plows, soil stays stitched together by roots and fungi. River water runs clearer longer before it goes coffee brown after a storm. Without irrigation ditches, wetlands keep their essays intact, and mosquitoes remain debates between frogs and dragonflies rather than municipal complaint threads. Grain-eating birds still hold loud meetings over seed heads, but nobody posts an angry letter to the editor about starlings because starlings have no editor. The landscape is not a museum. It is a workshop where no single apprentice gets to reorganize the tools. You kneel by a stand of wild barley and rub a head between your palms just to feel what the gesture remembers. Husks prick your skin. Awns cling and scratch. Your old world brain whispers recipes, flatbread, soups, pilafs, and the wind answers by rolling seed into a hare's path and a finch's beak. Historians still argue whether agriculture began as a stress response to climate flickers, as a side effect of feasting and bragging rights, or as a slow contingent dance of curiosity plus convenience. Take your pick. Tonight, the fields pick themselves. At a lakeshore, where elephants once tracked mud into stories, you watch geese raft and sedges bow. No one cuts reeds into mats. No one pins the marsh into rectangles. Yet order abounds. A hippo trail becomes a fish nursery, becomes a heron's patient. Calculus becomes a crocodile's argument for timing. Up the hill, wild pears throw scent into afternoon sweet tannic shy. Nobody grafts, nobody prunes. Nobody names a variety after their grandmother. The fruit falls into fur and feathers. Seeds pass south in bellies that choose their own roads. A bear cracks a limb to reach a cluster, tastes it, decides it's not quite poetry yet, and goes back to ants with the same resigned shrug you used to give to raw kale. You hike along a ridge and find a natural salt lick, glossy as a licked spoon, signed by Dear Aurochs Boar. No mineral blocks stamped with a ranch logo, just geology and tongues. In the distance, bison dust bathe. A dust devil lifts and dances like a curtain auditioning for a bigger window. On a basalt outcrop, a wild goat demonstrates exactly why goats get away with being goats. 4 hooves, 1 eyebrow raised at gravity. No bells, no shelters, no fencing. No wolves paid in sheep. The agreement between hunter and hunted stays local, negotiated daily, and orally with minutes recorded in scars and caution. Even fermentation, that little wizardry that used to turn your kitchen into a bubble chorus, keeps to the world's tempo. Fruit ferments on the branch, on the ground, in the hollows of trunks, in puddles where yeast gets lucky. Butterflies find these bars open late. Birds get mildly philosophical. The myth That elephants get tipsy on marula probably remains a myth, but the smell is heady enough to make even you feel a little opinionated about poetry. No amphorae line a cool cellar. No clay tablets, tally jars. The tally is in wings in bear tracks, headed back to the log in foxes surfing plumfall. As the day tilts, a flock of seed eaters lifts in a traveling cloud, and their shadows stripe your arms with tiny moving sermons. You think of granaries that never rose of barns, that never learned the gossip of rain, on tin of milling songs that never braided breath and flower dust. The world forgot nothing. It simply never had to memorize us. You brush chaff from your palms. Listen for the soft notes of wolves circling back through their own appointments, and feel the odd relief of a planet where wildness remains the default setting, not a memory or a park plan. The fan hum of evening picks up the same lull from our first night, and you let it smooth your thoughts into something slower, something like sleepwalking on the open seed-strewn palm of the earth. You follow the wolf's path until it dissolves into water, and then you follow the water. No concrete, no riprap, no gridded impatience. Just a river, doing what a river does when nobody tells it to behave. It loops like a lazy handwriting lesson, scrapes a bend into a brighter crescent, drops sand on the inside elbow, eats the outside bank with soft, steady teeth. You stand on a point bar that didn't exist last decade and won't exist next one, and the whole channel purrs like your bedside fan from Section 1, except wetter and with better bass. Rivers, without cities, keep their long memory. Snowmelt writes the spring chapters. Summer edits margins with thunderstorms. Autumn lets leaves sign their names. Winter tightens sentences into ice, then crosses them out in thaw. Where the current slows cottonwoods and willows grab any damp opportunity, a sprig rooting in a mere rumor of soil. Beavers read those sprouts like a to-do list. One family has stitched a low dam across a secondary braid, and the valley floor has changed pronouns from I to we. Pools mirror sky. Sedges comb the water. Frogs hold committee. Quirky tidbit for your pocket over time. Beaver neighborhoods can stack pond atop pond, raising the local water table so stubbornly that trout ride through droughts like VIPs with backstage passes. You pad along a cut bank and watch an oxbow carve itself out of the syllabus. The neck narrows with every flood, a future lake already practicing its outline. These meanders don't know you never heard of your real estate, and yet they offer the same lesson you used to pay for in workshops: let things curve. Light joke 1. You look for a sign that says Scenic Overlook. Realize there's no Parks Department, and promote yourself to Parks Department by simply appreciating it out loud. Downstream, the valley widens into a floodplain made of layered afternoons, old channels abandoned in graceful script. New ones, sketching corrections in shiny ink. Without levees, water takes the room it needs, and then leaves a tip silt, fine as flour. In another timeline, people along the Nile set their calendars by such generosity. Mainstream fact: to anchor your feet before the Aswan High Dam, the Nile's annual flood delivered dark, nutrient-rich mud that fed fields and fables for millennia. Here, with no fields to feed, the mud feeds everything else. Reed beds green up. Fish nurseries bloom among roots. Ibises and spoonbills comb the shallows with the calm rapture of librarians in a rare book room. Turn your head, and the floodplain turns continent. The Mississippi in the world you remember wants to jump to the Atchafalaya every few centuries. Engineers built a stern parent called the O River Control Structure to say no. Here, no parent stands at the door. The big river keeps its ancient habit of avulsion, abandoning an old course for a steeper shortcut when floods grant permission. Deltas suffer, shed and grow like living handwriting at the Gulf lobes waxing and waning as the river decides where to put its commas this century. Historians still argue whether old flood myths, Ararat, Deucalion Nuu, encode cultural memory of real avulsions or float as pure allegory. Meanwhile, the water just flips to a fresh page and keeps writing. You drift east in your head, and the world obliges with humidity. The Ganges Brahmaputra thrums through a labyrinth of channels, an orchestra tuning in warm air. Mangroves lock mud with welded roots. Mud skippers stage slapstick on the tide line. Fishing cats leave punctuation marks in the ooze. The delta is so wide, it feels like a conversation with weather, rather than a place, and with no embankments to demand certainty, the conversation remains honest, if occasionally loud. Light joke 2. You consider filing a flood insurance claim with an agent named Monsoon and decide the premium is a willingness to nap on higher ground for a week. South and west, the Niger loosens into an inland fan that shines like a mirror dropped on step. The inner delta watered by distance and timing. Hippos sentence the channels into paragraphs. Jacanas stroll on lily pads with delicate feet like calligraphers who refuse blotting paper. Farther south still, the Okavango arrives in the Kalahari, decides oceans are overrated, and evaporates into sky with theatrical flair. In your timeline, it's called an alluvial fan or an endorheic delta. Here, it's simply an appointment between river and sun. Lions learn to wade. Lechwe learn to read mud. Crocodiles practice patience twice a day. Rivers remain factories for edges, where current meets slack, where salt meets fresh, where shade meets glare. Life stacks itself in imaginative shelves. Lampreys drafting up riffles, salmon smelting the ocean into muscle, and then donating that to forests' mayflies, writing elegies you can only see at dusk. Beavers are back on the clock upstream, bending hydrographs, adding a little lag to the loud parts and a little memory to the dry ones. The pond's surface looks sleepy, but every inch below trades oxygen temperature and cover like notes in a study group. You try the coast for a while to taste the difference. In the absence of dredgers and sea walls, barrier islands migrate like seabirds west, here east there, rolling over themselves as storms chew the ocean side and the bay side rebuilds with calmer hands. They don't protect property. They are property of wind and tide. Salt marshes sprawl behind them loud with fiddler crabs and red tails of marsh hawks. A new inlet opens during a storm with the crisp authority of a fresh eraser mark, and you applaud without knowing the etiquette. Light joke 3. You nearly declare yourself mayor of sand, but the ghost shrimp filibuster by bubbling little fountains at your feet. Head back inland under a sky smelled faintly of petrichor and sap. The Danube rifles through reed and willow toward the Black Sea. The Lena smears silver into the Laptov with patience only the subarctic learns. The Mekong parcels out silt like a careful ant who knows everyone's tea preferences. In flood season, entire forests go underwater. The Amazon's Varzea turns into a dream of trees waiting. Fish eat fruit and disperse seeds. Pink river dolphins ghost between trunks, like a rumor you believe because it's lovely. Quirky detail to tuck behind your ear in some Amazon lake's floating islands called matupas form thick rafts of intertwined roots where caimans bask heron's nest and the occasional capybara contemplates a career in nautical real estate. When water roams naturally across its floodplain, mosquitoes are just one voice in a chorus that includes dragonflies, swallows, bats, and fish mouths making polite plops at dusk. Disease remains a geometry problem solved by distance diversity and cold nights, not a citywide headache that calls a meeting. Sandhill cranes stitch sky to marsh with needled cries. Pelicans draw white parentheses around schools of fish. On a night with stars like salt-synchronous fireflies along a Southeast Asian river, fall into rhythm, their pulses aligning as if a conductor tapped the stand with a wand made of moonlight. You stand still, and time smooths out. A mainstream anchor for your inner map reader rivers naturally build levees along their banks during floods as coarser sediments drop, first creating slightly raised rims. Behind them, lower swales and back swamps collect finer silt and later amphibian gossip. You can see the topography with your feet firm under the willow line, then squishier, then firm again on an old meander ridge. Every flood redraws this diagram with a steady hand. When the hand shakes, a channel breaks and writes elsewhere. You listen to the controversies you no longer have to join. People in your world once argued about dams as emblems of progress or prisons for water. Here, reservoirs are glacial lakes and beaver saucers. Historians still argue whether the Indus Valley cities aligned their streets to manage floods as much as trade, whether the lost Sarasvati was river myth or clever braid of both. In this timeline, the Harappans never arrived to have preferences, and the river prefers its own. Your shoulders drop an inch you didn't know they were holding up. One last bend before evening, a natural levee crowned with elderberry fox tracks stitched along the crest. You sit, swing your feet above a quiet eddy, and watch a kingfisher become a blue punctuation mark. No canals to shortcut meanders, no culverts to choke a creek's throat, no concrete turnpikes to teach water about straight lines. The channel hum you hear is the old algorithm running without patch notes, and the floodplain agrees because it also wrote the code. When the first stars remember themselves and show up, the river trades mirrors with the sky. You smell damp earth, cooling silt sweeter than any bakery you remember. Somewhere upstream, a beaver tail slaps closing bell. A night heron clicks its way to a patient perch. You pull your breath into the same long sentence the water speaks, curving where it curves, pausing where roots catch running again when the grade invites. The fan hum comes back, not from your room this time, but from 1,000 air bubbles whispering along gravel, from reeds combing wind from the soft step of a fox lifting careful feet. You let the sound carry you to that edge between waking and sleep, where even a meander looks like a straight line because you're moving with it, not against it. You smell it before you see it, the dry metal breath that rides ahead of heat like a warning written in the nose. The sky stacks into gray felt. Wind fingers the grass one way, then the other. Not frantic, just intent. Lightning stitches a ragged hem on a far horizon and unrolls a thin, bright sentence across the savanna. No matchsticks, no cook fires, no burn piles at field edges, just the old electrician at work. You step onto a termite mound, our favorite air-conditioned balcony, and watch the burn calendar keep its appointment. The strike finds a hill of cured stems, and whispers become news. Fire stands up and begins to walk. It doesn't gallop. It strolls nibbling thatch, dodging green tongues of recent rain, raising a filigree of smoke that smells like hay and pepper. Antelopes flow around it with the same practiced attention you used yesterday to avoid crocodiles. The breeze holds steady, so the flame edge stays courteous, a ribbon rather than a wall. Light joke 1. You consider texting the wind. Plus, keep doing exactly this. Remember, you have no phone and also no service plan for weather, and settle for a respectful nod in its direction. In this world with no suppression, cruise, no roads to box the blaze into neat rectangles, and no slash and burn to rewrite the syllabus. Fire returns on the schedule, the plants helped design. Tall grasses evolved for it, meristems sunk low and safe, seeds ready to sprint after ash falls like black snow. Longleaf pines in other latitudes wear their grass stage like a spare haircut, hugging fire close and then shooting skyward once they've banked enough courage. Eucalypts store oils that pop like punctuation, and then fling seed into the first sunny vacancy. Mainstream fact to ground the shimmer wildfire is not a human invention. Charcoal turns up in rocks more than 400 million years old. A geologic diary entry from the Devonian saying, "Combustion attends where oxygen and fuel agree." You feel soot's old perfume, and know you're standing in the oldest workshop on Earth. The fire here licks and moves on pruning shrubs, clearing litter, feeding soil with a thin meal of minerals. A day later, rain sketches green in the black. Grazers arrive in a neat line, reading the neon of regrowth like open late signs. Insects show up first, tiny crackling feet, and then birds marshal the buffet. Quirky tidbit for your pocket: certain jewel beetles can sense the infrared of distant flames and fly toward fresh burns to lay eggs in still warm wood. It's as if someone made a smoke alarm that says nursery instead of danger. You watch one flash like a moving sequin and vanish into the polite steam of a charred branch. Travel north, and grass gives way to low shrubs, with an attitude chaparral that hoards oils like gossip. Here, fire is not a barber, but a reset switch. It waits years, sometimes decades, for the pact of drought, heat, and wind to line up. Then it drafts the hills in a fast, hot, hand-cracking seed pods that only answer to flame. Banksias and lodgepole pines keep serratinous cones sealed tight until heat unzips them. Then seed fall writes punctuation across ash. A black-backed woodpecker stages in tapping new snag neighborhoods as if posting a change of address card to the forest. Light joke too. You instinctively reach for a marshmallow and a stick. Then remember, we agreed there would be no campfires, no brownies, and frankly, no kitchen. And you apologize to the air for even thinking about dessert. Boreal forest comes with its own script. Black spruce candles, resinous and primed, crowned by a sky that sometimes turns fire's heat into its own weather. Pyrocumulus tower up. Thunder rattles out of clouds born from smoke. Embers ride the wind to write footnotes ahead of the main text. The return interval, up here, is long, decades to a century, and the effect is sweeping old stands give way to fresh mosaics. Permafrost, edges, blink, peat size, if it dries too deep. Moose step into birch that rise after spruce. Snowshoe hares redraw their roots. Lynx follow with quiet signatures. Historians still argue whether early people, had they been around here in our alternate history, would have painted these cycles with careful culture-shaped burns or merely read them and adapted. Here, the only editors are lightning, wind, and time. Not every flame is high drama. In many savannas and open woodlands, fire takes breakfast instead of dinner. Frequent light face level. It trims, it tidies. It keeps trees honest and grasses ambitious. Elephants push corridors that act like fire breaks. Hippos print wet signatures along channels. Beaver meadows stitch damp seams across valleys, so flames must tiptoe around the quilts, not tear them. You can see yesterday's line in a thin black scrawl, and today's in a gray smudge, and tomorrow's in a faint rumor that smells of sun-baked thatch. Between them, quail and francolin gossip loudly, as if volume itself were a sprinkler system. The ocean adds its opinion in the Mediterranean, in fynbos, in coastal ranges, where summer is merely a longer word for dry. Shrubs memorize the dry months and spend carefully. Seeds hoard sleep until smoke tells them a vacancy has opened. You pass through a slope of silver green and cinnamon stems after a burn, and the first rain beads on ash like dew on velvet. Lizards own the world for a week. Hares sketch hop scripts across black pages. You feel ridiculous for how good ash smells when it's thin and clean, like a charcoal pencil, writing on the edge of rain. Animals read flame with more than panic. Some raptors hunt the fire line, plucking flushed prey from the margins. In Australia, Aboriginal rangers have long told of firehawks' black kites, and others picking up smoldering sticks to start new spot fires and push prey out. Whether every biologist signs off or not, you watch a kite worry, a coal drop it into grass, and ride the rising beetle and mouse parade with the pleased look of a chef who just opened a second station. Ecologists still argue whether behaviors like this are widespread trickery or local genius. The mouse's opinion is a tiny squeaked 2. Widespread. You step into a giant tree cathedral where light falls in coins and the air smells like old books and citrus. Cones hang like green lanterns high above. Bark stacks in fibrous flame-sculpted plates. Low fire here is not an intruder. It's the usher that keeps the aisles clear. Heat nods at resin nods at gravity seeds take the hint. Saplings lift through the opened understory like choir boys whose feet finally found the floor. Your boots press into soft, warm ash, and you hear last section's river still humming in the distance, a firebreak that remembers to widen the night for herons. You keep your eye on peat too. Those patient sodden libraries. When drought lingers and lightning is insistent, peat can smolder low and long, moving invisibly, exhaling a sweet, tired breath. The burn is slow and oddly polite, but it edits centuries in a season if rain stays stingy. Dragonflies patrol the margins. Cranes drop legs like landing gear into open water that wasn't open a month ago. Return intervals here are slow, and recovery is a meditation that teaches moss to start again. Even the sky needs note smoke, concede clouds ice, and ash bargaining in high air. Sunsets go theatrical, all copper, and rose and bruised purple smears. Migrating birds root around columns of heat, the way they route around mountains, flexible, confident, occasionally opinionated. Bats punch in late, when embers cool, and insects reopen the night market. Light joke 3. You catch yourself whispering last call to the beetles, and then remember you are the only creature here that cares about bar hours. What's absent is as instructive as what's present. No planes carve checkerboards of retardant. No dozers draw new scars across ridgelines. No suburban fences decide where flame is allowed to pause. Without our long century of suppression, fuel doesn't pile into catastrophic jackpots so often. Frequent small cleansings keep many places from explosive tantrums. Where big fires do happen, they happen with reasons the hills understand a decade of dry wind that won't shut up a shrubland that owed itself a change. You stand in a fresh mosaic black patches, bronze patches, green sparks, unburned pockets spared by a quirk in breeze or a trick in shade. Quail skid between clumps. A fox surveys from a log and then forgets you in favor of more interesting news. Mainstream history peeks back in just to wave people once did use fire. Deliberately, grassland cultures, painting prairies with cool burns, bark harvesters, asking the forest politely swidden farmers, turning ash into a brief fertility-shaping mosaics that many species came to expect. Historians still argue whether those practices created the savanna look across continents or simply harmonized with what lightning already composed. Here, the composition proceeds in the original key, and you can still hear melody and counter-melody, rain and grass wind and sparkseed and ash. When night slips her shawl over the scene, the ground holds a low warmth, like fresh bread, that exists only as memory. Crickets take their cue and retune the dark. Somewhere, a distant snag falls with a single syllable done, and owls reset their edges. You breathe a little smoke and a lot of relief. Fire, you realize, is not the villain in your bedtime story. It's the page turn. It makes room without asking you first. It brings the green you'll step into tomorrow, and the insects that will drowse your ears, and the woodpecker rhythm that will beat you gently back toward sleep. The fan hum returns part river, part wind, sifting ashes, part your own slower pulse, and you let the day cool around you until the stars stop flickering and start to look like nails holding the roof of the night in place. You tilt your ear away from hoof and claw and listen for different classrooms, the quiet laboratories where curiosity does its slow push-ups. You already met ravens freelancing as wolf consultants. Now you give them center stage. A pair rides the morning like it was designed for their black glint, and you watch one drop a stick, catch it mid-air, then stash it in a crack as if saving an idea for later. Corvids cache not just food, but options. In a nearby grove, a crow nudges a pliant twig against bark, trims a neat barb, and fishes out a beetle like a locksmith congratulating a cylinder. Mainstream fact to pin to the branch. New Caledonian crows in our world are famous for crafting hooked tools in the wild, shaping sticks and pandanus leaves to snag grubs, one of the clearest non-human examples of cumulative tool know-how. With nobody to shoo them from park bins or bait stations, their craft stays homegrown, traded in family afternoons, and argued across windbreaks like local recipes. Ravens hold town halls that look like dances. When a carcass appears, they gather posture, and sometimes call in allies before confronting a dominant eagle, a politics of courage. You can hear in throaty croaks and see in sidelong glances. Quirky tidbit for your pocket corvids sometimes seem to hold funerals, mobbing silently around a dead kin, a behavior researchers read as information sharing about danger. Here it looks like both data and weathered respect. Light joke 1, you raise a hand to say a few words, and a raven tilts its head like, "We'll open the floor to public comment when you've learned to fly." The parrot nations wake with opinions. On a ridge where frost sugars tussock Kia, those alpine mechanics arrive like green laughter. Two of them work a puzzle. They invented, flip the flat stone, take a beetle, trade the beetle for the pride of flipping the next stone. They ping you with eyes that have already solved you. Far north, palm cockatoos parade through open woodland with drumsticks they've fashioned from branches beating steady rhythms on hollow trunks. Courtship performed like a garage band. Males even customize sticks and reuse them. If art needs an audience, feathers will do. At the forest edge, a great bowerbird has been fussing with pebbles for hours, arranging small near the entrance and large deeper within to forge forced perspective, a trick that makes the avenue look longer to a visiting female. Historians still argue whether such illusions count as aesthetic sense or whether you should call it optical engineering performed with seeds for stakes. The bowerbird, who knows exactly how good it looks, declines to participate in the panel. You slip back to savanna shade, and the air deepens, dust-dung old leaves, and a low note you feel more than hear. Elephants breathe information into ground and sky. A matriarch pauses, listens with her feet, Piscinian corpuscles in her soles, reading seismic rumors that can travel kilometers, and then leads her family on a line that looks like memory. Infrasound threads between bellies. Calves slip under bellies like commas. Mainstream anchor stamped gently on your mind. Elephants in mirror tests have shown self-recognition, touching marks on their heads with their trunks. Rare company among animals. Here mirrors, are pools, and the test is how long they gaze at their own reflections before deciding water is for drinking, not for philosophy. Light joke 2. You consider asking the matriarch for directions, and she gives you a look that says she remembers where a water hole was during a bad year 3 decades back, and also remembers your embarrassing stumble from section 4. When the family reaches a mud wallow, they baptize dust into armor, then stand over a skull, not performatively, just present. You've heard all the ways to read this investigation of calcium vigilance for danger, social memory, something grief-like. Historians still argue whether elephant mourning is our projection or their interior weather showing briefly at the surface. Either way, the pause has weight. A teenager kicks a rib and spooks, then pretends it meant to do that. Adolescence is a language older than hominins. The sea calls with a long, slow vowel, so you take your shadow down a dune to where water counts time. Offshore a mile, the water itself sounds different, quieter, without our engines like velvet instead of denim. Humpbacks are mid-verse, and you can almost map the song's bars as they roll. In your old world, their songs drift and mutate through populations. A catchy phrase can sweep an ocean in a season like a chart-topping single. Here it still happens. Melodies climb a ladder of throats, then change as if art and migration share a spinal cord. Far beneath, a sperm whale clan ticks its name in codas discrete, click patterns, socio-linguistic shibboleths that say us with the same blunt softness your grandmother used to Sahome. Researchers once mapped such clans by coda dialect. Nothing about this sea suggests the dialects do anything but deepen. Closer to shore, a bottlenose kneels to the seafloor and wears a sea sponge over her rostrum, rummaging like a careful ant in the pantry, sponging a foraging tradition passed matrilineally in certain populations. Mainstream. Fact number 2. Because you're spoiled, dolphins use signature whistles that function like names, calling others and even answering when those whistles are played back. When nobody tags them or chases them for photographs, they still invent nicknames and in-jokes because of course they do. Historians still argue whether cetacean communication earns the title language with syntax and recursion, or whether it's a symphony that never pretends to be grammar. You float listening to pointless clicks ricochet off fish and decide that either way, it's more than enough to fill a night. A mile down the coast, tide leaves memory in saucers of rock. An octopus unplugs itself from shadow skin rippling from basalt to lichen to wet leaf in 3 heartbeats, then taps along like a lock, picking its own door. It pops a mussel, tastes the hinge like a code, then slides under a found helmet, half a coconut shell, to commute across sand incognito. Quirky tidbit to tuck in your sleeve. In Indonesia, veined octopuses have been observed collecting coconut halves and assembling them as portable shelters, tool use that looks like DIY minimalism. Light joke. 3. You compliment the octopus on its tiny studio apartment. It flashes a paler shrug that reads, "Open concept, great light. 7 roommates I can become if needed." Octopus brilliance runs into a problem. Time invented short lives. Most species get a year or 2, 3 if the tides are generous, which makes teaching the grandkids a challenge when you'll never meet them. But intelligence doesn't only move in lineage lessons. It moves in how a habitat holds leftovers. A good den becomes a library of shells and bottle caps. A reef corridor becomes a syllabus of ambushes. A tide pool becomes a pop quiz graded by gulls. If there is culture here, it may be written in places more than in heads. Back inland, you pass magpies playing catch with a pine cone, then pretending they weren't. You watch a scrub jay bury seeds and later fake bury when observed deception as a hobby. In a canyon, a Clark's nutcracker models topography and memory, returning to caches months later, as if it had drawn a contour map on the back of its eye. Historians still argue whether the social intelligence hypothesis or the ecological intelligence hypothesis better explains who gets clever and why big groups driving brains up to handle gossip or tricky environments driving brains up to handle maps. The ravens vote yes to both by stealing a fox's lunch and then remembering the ridgetop where the fox sulked afterward. You start to recognize a pattern that doesn't need you minds explore when there's room to. Ravens and wolves continue their Talmudic discussions over meat. Elephants carry maps inside grandmothers. They also carry decisions in the slow crinkle at the corner of an eye. Whales braid culture into sound that crosses horizons. Parrots treat boredom as an enemy nation and mount daily raids. Octopuses write short stories and burn the manuscripts in a year. In your old world, we admired these acts through tanks, tags, blinds, and papers. In this one, the curriculum proceeds without witnesses and still produces graduates. If there's a successor to cities here, it won't have walls. It will be a reef, remembered by dolphins, a waterhole remembered by elephants, a tool tradition remembered by crows, a music remembered by whales. Streets will be scent trails and infrasonic corridors. Libraries will be middens and matupas from Section 6. Archives will be migratory maps that the stars help stitch and rivers revise. The night gives you a last chorus, a raven's coarse laugh, a humpback's cathedral vowel, an elephant's bone-deep murmur, a kia's bright heckle, the papery puff of an octopus squeezing home. You breathe the fan hum that has followed you since the beginning wind. Water, 1,000 small intelligences working, and your thoughts thin into something restful and wide, as if your own mind had learned finally to purr. You take the long stairs down the dune, the kind that shift underfoot and refuse to agree. They're stairs, and the ocean lifts its slow breathing to meet you. In the first few steps of the shallows, that breath is all grains and hush. 10 steps more, and it's a quilt of motion. Eelgrass combing the current anchovies in jittery silver committees, a cormorant tightening itself into a sinking thought. The loudest thing here is the surf. There's no diesel throb, no trawl doors mowing the seafloor, no high ping tattoos from sonar drawing chalk lines through the water column. The sea sounds like wind blown large. Swim out lazy seal slow, and the water becomes a library of roots. Gray whales practice their coast-hugging pilgrimages. Calves tucked in like commas mothers reading shoreline contours, the way elephants in Section 8 read dust and riverbeds. Across the blue rooms, humpbacks trade verses, and you can hear the new riffs we left them room to write. Your mainstream anchor set, gently on the surface like a buoy. Great whales aren't just passengers. They fertilize oceans. Scientists call part of it the whale pump iron and nitrogen carried from deep feeding to sunlit waters via poop confetti. Blooming plankton that feed krill that feed whales in a loop that looks suspiciously like applause. Here, with no whaling fleets to thin the choir and no plastic to foul the instruments, the loop runs fuller, longer, steadier. Below you, the kelp forest unrolls a green cathedral. Stipes rise like columns. Blades rattle in a lazy metronome. Light filters in coins that never hit the floor. Sea-otters arrow and tumble working the understory in aprons of bubbles. One rides on her back with a stone tucked in the loose skin under her forearm otter's built-in pocket, then taps a urchin open with the efficiency of a short-order cook. Quirky tidbit to file beside the Kia drummer. A sea otter's pocket isn't a purse, but a patch of loose skin they use to stash stones and snacks. If there were receipts, this would be where they'd crumple them. Urchins denied the chance to mow the forest to nubs stay in their proper lanes, and the kelp answers with height and plenty. Rockfish hang like punctuation marks in the shafts of light. A harbor seal considers you, decides you're not edible or particularly glamorous, and moves on. Historians still argue whether pre-industrial fishing in the North Atlantic had already bent cod stocks before steam trawlers made the sea floor into a spreadsheet. But out here, in this version, nobody drags iron across sponge gardens. Nobody stacks bycatch on a deck, and nobody turns a reef into a memory by accident. The seafloor keeps its shag tube worms doing applauded planks, sea pens swaying like candelabras, scallops clapping their odd applause from patch to patch. Soft corals lift and curl their small, polite hands as currents bring the news. Plankton detritus gossip from a river half a world away. Turn toward warmer water, and the blue goes lucid, a kind of clarity that tastes like lime if you close your eyes. A reef lifts through the color wheel violets to tangerines to the understated browns of builders doing their best work. Parrotfish rasp at coral, turn skeleton into sand, and then bedtime fashion note. Some of them pull a translucent sleeping bag over their heads, a mucus cocoon that likely masks their scent from nocturnal hunters. You grin into your mask night pajamas that double as anti-snore technology. Cleaners run their car washes at designated stations, wrasses wiggling invites while groupers lean in like dignitaries at a ribbon cutting. Anemone fish tend their frilled fortresses. Damselfish mow tiny algal lawns with the zeal of suburban legends. The reef is loud, the way cities are loud. Clicks, pops, crackles, fish drums, shrimp snaps. Only the noise is communication, not combustion. Bleaching still happens on this planet. Heat waves can come with El Niño and cousins. Currents can play pranks. But absent a sudden greenhouse shove from our chimneys, the thermal dice don't stay loaded year after year. Recovery windows open wider, larvae drift in on good years, and reseed scars like freckles of luck. Crown of thorns starfish bloom sometimes, and then fade unpushed by fertilizer or absent predators. Sharks complain about nothing and cruise like confident punctuation. A hawksbill treats a sponge with the respect owed to a long, delicate meal. Green turtles graze seagrass meadows into lawns that oxygenate water and house juveniles by the armful. Miles offshore, it gets blue the way a deep bell gets blue. Beaked whales, those shy deep divers with faces like riddles, rise and fall on their own schedule, not spooked into fast ascents by military soundtracks. In your other world, forensic maps linked certain mass strandings to intense mid-frequency sonar. Here, there's only wave talk and whale talk, and the occasional thunder of distant surf. Light joke 1. You cup your ear underwater for a better listen. And remember, right, you are a mammal, ears are not gills, and the ocean politely suggests you use your whole head next time. Sardine schools condense and pour like mercury, each fish listening to neighbors, each neighbor listening to shadows. Predators arrange themselves. Dolphins draw cursive around the ball. Gannets fold wings and pencil in from the sky. Bronze whaler sharks underline every paragraph. Anchovy and sardine regimes still flip with climate oscillations, upwelling, strengthening, then slacking. But because nobody minds the schools to their basement with purse scenes, the flips feel like breathing, not a panic attack. Sea lions finish a round and belly flop into a nap on a floating log like large, wet commas. You try not to take their yawn personally. Return to the kelp, and you'll find the quiet sociologists at work. A wolf-eel pair shares a den-big head, soft eyes, a kind of long-married vibe that makes you want to bring a casserole. Juvenile rockfish mill like students avoiding eye contact with a syllabus. Harbor seals conduct stealth surveys of all comical behavior within 100 meters. Somewhere in the shadows, a giant Pacific octopus declares a neighborhood improvement plan that includes moving the same shell twice for reasons left unstated. Light joke. 2. You applaud underwater, which makes exactly as much sense as clapping in a library, and a nearby Garibaldi gives you the side eye that means no flash photography, even though you have neither flash nor camera, nor reliable sense of fish sarcasm. Shores, built by living things, keep showing off once you notice the pattern. Oysters stack themselves into knobbly walls that blunt storm chop and turn clouded water clear. Each adult can filter liters per hour as if running a tiny laundromat. With no dredges to raise them and no silt pulses from plowed hills to smother them, the reefs fatten into cities and juvenile fish set up shop in alleys that smell faintly of salt and tide-baked sunshine. Marsh grass rhizomes lock mud. Mangrove prop roots knit nursery labyrinths where baby sharks learn the ABCs of patience and not freaking out. Manatees cruise leafily through freshwater plumes, crunching water hyacinth where it's native and not everywhere else. Because delightful twist, there is no everywhere else when ships don't carry stowaways across oceans in ballast tanks. Out in desert blue flying fish keep their old joke. They burst from the surface like thrown knives, spread pectorals into little gliders, and simply underperform gravity for obscene distances. Frigates write dark, hooked exclamation points above them. Way below, lanternfish do the nightly elevator hauling carbon down in the slow, faithful pump of diurnal migration. You drift above twilight and feel the planet's biggest commute pass beneath your toes. There is a calm here, born of absence. No plastic rasping along the swash line. No ghost nets. Ballroom, dancing with turtles. No glitter of microbeads shined into sandpipers. If you want an argument, the sea can oblige with a gentle one. Marine ecologists still debate whether predators ripple down food webs everywhere, with the drama seen in those famous sea-otter urchin kelp stories, or whether some systems are so noisy and patchy that cascades arrive muted local, not universal. Historians still argue whether medieval fishing already changed the character of North Sea shoals long before engines, and whether our ideas of pristine were ever anything but moving targets. In this version of the ocean, the debates become thought. Experiments, you float like kelp bulbs in the sun. You keep your conclusions soft and your ears open. Dusk oils the surface, and the water answers with bioluminescence, tiny living diodes flicking on where your fingers feather the dark. A wave breaks like shaken stars. Plankton. Flash switch off flash again. The underwater equivalent of neighbors, turning their porch lights on and off in a pattern you swear has meaning. A ray, ghosts in the glow wings tipping. Light joke. 3. You write your name in the bloom with a finger and immediately feel guilty about tagging an ancient monument. The copepods forgive you because your handwriting is atrocious. By the time you belly onto the sand, you're carrying a quiet you didn't have when you went in. Behind you, the kelp keeps its parish. The reef keeps its carnival. The pelagic keeps its long roads marked by smell and current, and the pull of the moon. Turtles snore in caves, gills moving like fans set to low. Whales coast the thermocline like freight trains that chose diplomacy over timetables. Shorebirds do quick math in the rack and whisper a verdict you can't hear. The only thing that squeaks is the sand under your heel. You lie back, use your damp shirt as a pillow, and listen to the oldest fan hum of all, the one that taught the first lullaby to the first lungs. The tide inches up polite as ever and tucks you in with a breath that smells of salt and far travel. You wake to a tremor. You can feel through your elbows on the ground, soft, regular, like distant drums under a blanket. The horizon shivers into life, and the first backs rise into the morning like low hills that decided to move. Mammoths, shaggy as winter itself, are crossing a pale steppe where wind writes horizontal sentences. You smell crushed sage and cold wool. Calves tuck between legs. Matriarchs carry the map, the way the river in Section 6 carried every curve inside, exact, unhurried. You thought you knew large. You were wrong in a pleasant, humbling way. The air here has that thin, dry sparkle of a cold, seasoned grassland. Mainstream fact, pocket-sized, but big enough to lean on during the late Pleistocene. A vast mammoth steppe stretched from Spain across Siberia to Alaska. A cold, dry grassland where mammoths, woolly rhinos, horses, and bison grazed one of the richest megafaunal communities ever known. In your old timeline, much of that vanished between about 50,000 and 10,000 years ago. In this one, the drumbeat continues. Tusks arc like moons, trunks stripe dust onto hides as gentle punctuation. Hooves sow the turf into short, bright nap that invites wildflowers to bloom low and thick. You shadow the herd and learn their manners by osmosis. They tug at sedges, topple a dead snag, rub parasites into bark a porcupine appreciates later. When a calf squeaks, 3 ants step closer, the way thunder steps closer to rain. Dung falls with agricultural optimism, and beetles applaud with quick wings. Light joke 1, you consider pitching them your startup Uber for dung rollers and decide the beetles have already cornered the market and would outcompete you on enthusiasm alone. The old steppe isn't just herbivores in warm coats. A shadow with a saber smile moves at the edge, macharodont grace you met back in Section 1. Wolves braid themselves into the periphery, shepherding opportunity. Ravens annotate the whole scene in black italics. But the giants tilt the ecosystem scale. When mammoths knock back willow encroachment, grass stays boss. When grass stays boss, snow drifts differently. When snow drifts differently, spring timing shifts. When timing shifts, calves and nests and blooms stack in new harmonies. You can see the cascade in the way wind stops chattering when it meets a grazed swale and starts again when it finds taller stems. Cross an ocean of sky and land into woollier woods. Cave bears sleep away noon in limestone apartments. Musk oxen form living fortresses that rotate like polite clocks. Woolly rhinoceros plow frost, with faces built for emphatic disagreement. On a river bar, a straight-tusked elephant cousin to the mammoth longer, sleeker tests the current with a leg as if previewing a dance step. Everywhere, the giants leave wide signatures. Paths, like braided ropes, wallows that become amphibian conservatories, broken branches that write sunlight into crowded canopies. You turn south, and the air fattens with green. In the Americas, the ground invents new animals every time you blink. A giant ground sloth, the size of a small truck, that's Megatherium's energy, rears up and strips a branch into confetti, then stands there chewing with the serene vibe of a meditation instructor. Its claws look like punctuation for a language that emphasizes pauses. Nearby, an armored dome on toenails glyptodon trundles past like a medieval footstool that learned ambition. Quirky tidbit to keep. If you'd cut open a glyptodon's shell, please don't, you'd find it's built from thousands of fused bony plates called osteoderms, a living suit of mail. Somewhere along a river, Castoroids, the giant beaver slides into water, big as a boulder, that tries its very best to be friendly, proving that some jokes really do write themselves. Fruit trees answer with satisfactions they haven't experienced for tens of thousands of years in your other world. Remember those megafaunal anachronisms you once read about fruits like avocado osage, orange, and pawpaw that seem designed for mouths bigger than any animal left to carry them. Here the mouths show up. A gomphothere, four-tusked elephantkin, murmurs through a grove and swallows avocados whole like polite emerald coins, then donates the seeds downstream, wrapped in helpful fertilizer. Osage oranges vanish into proboscises as if the trees were handing out green meteorites on purpose. The forest looks relieved, as if a long-missing mail carrier finally returned to the route. Islands keep their tall secrets. In New Zealand's mist-ribboned beach valleys, moa browse at shoulder height 12 feet of feather and seriousness. Their feet print ellipses in the loam. Their crops grind leaves and stones into the word enough. Above the sky develops talons. Haast's eagle, still the apex you met in Section 4, drops the altitude with hypocrisy-defying wings. You give hills a wide berth because you like your scalp where it is. Light joke 2. You consider wearing a bush on your head as camouflage, then decide being a shrub impersonator is a lifestyle commitment you are not ready to make. On Madagascar, elephant birds, massive moon egg layers pace sandy flats and dune thicket edges thighs, riding drum beats into the afternoon. Giant lemurs browse like slow, thoughtful deer in trees that grow seed pods with the exact enthusiasm of beings expecting big mouths. Rivers, there are muddier, richer. Baobabs look less like lonely sculptures and more like social clubs for bees, bats, and lemurs that carry pollen across wide, remembering distances. In the Caribbean dwarf ground, sloths hang out on island slopes, swimming between cays when curiosity outweighs caution. You watch one perform the slowest backstroke in the archipelago and feel your own heartbeat politely decelerate to match. Australia sighs eucalyptus and unspools a cast list with ranged diprotodon, a van-sized wombat with a comically honest face. Procoptodon, a short-faced kangaroo that box steps across saltbush with the confidence of a bouncer. Thylacines still ghosting creeklines at dusk stripes like whispers. Emus and cassowaries perform the ancient joke of bird, but with opinions. Lace monitors steal eggs and your attention. Without us, the old Pleistocene attrition never crescendos into a final act. The giants teach the shrubs to keep corridors open. The shrubs teach the fire to walk, not run. The fire teaches the soil to knit. The soil teaches the water to linger. The country learns its own name again every wet season. If you want numbers to hum while you fall asleep, bison herds still darken horizons. Pronghorn still flex that ridiculous speed you admired in Section 4. Musk ox still form their furry phalanxes. But the presence of mammoths changes the instrument. Their tusks carve paths through snow that elk can then inherit. Their foraging knocks birch back, letting sun pinch the ground awake early. In summer, flies concentrate on herds, drawing swallows and dragonflies into tight, quick choreographies. In winter, their warm hollows draft tiny microclimates where a winter wren will trust its small heart to beat out another dusk. Historians still argue whether the late quaternary extinctions were driven primarily by human hunting climate whiplash at the end of the Ice Age disease or a lethal cocktail of all three. You sit with that argument like you sit with a campfire you didn't light, respectful distance, open face. Here you get to see what happens when one of the ingredients never makes it into the pot. Climate still pulls stunts. Droughts still impose edits. But the rhetorical flourish of the overkill chapter never arrives. The book reads differently. Not that life stops being dramatic. A blizzard can still spend a week writing monotone over a valley. An ice dam can still fail and send a cold brown fist down a gorge. A summer can still fry too hard too long. But when the giants show up next spring, they reopen the trails, re-air the grass, reseed the edges with their feet. Salmon runs draft bears, that draft willows, that draft songbirds. Mammoth herds draft grass that drafts spring, that drafts pollinators. The choreography feels redundant, only if you confuse repetition with boredom. Out here, repetition is the point proof that a system remembers. You get small by a pond that used to be a mammoth wallow and listen to frogs chant the slowest arena anthem you've ever heard. A flock of cranes bows across the sky, legs trailing voices antique and elegant. On the far bank, a family of moas steps out of cover drinks, then shadows back into beach shade. In the shallows, a turtle nudges an avocado seed to a place with better light. Light joke 3. You raise a pretend glass to the turtle to urban planning, and it blinks like a city council member who has heard worse ideas. By dusk, the herd is a stitched silhouette against a stripe of old rose sky. Ravens come down from their editorial perches and walk between ankles like small, confident journalists looking for quotes. A young mammoth discovers its trunk again, this hour's favorite toy, and flaps it at a grass tussock with the same joy a Kia from Section 8 felt for a flipped stone. You smile because it's impossible not to. The fan hum swells wind through old grass insects, tuning the velvet hush of big lungs. The giants do not apologize for their size. The land does not apologize for making room. You lie back on the crisped nap they keep, and the stars push through like seeds after rain. You wake in the gray between breaths, halfway to a dream, where the mammoths from last night are still walking, and halfway to the morning, where a mosquito is making career plans near your ear. You roll your head on the grass and notice the quietest absence of all. No city cough, no market babble, no long crowded lines for a doctor with tired eyes. Epidemics exist here, but they don't have the architecture they needed to become legends. Disease is still a traveler. It just rides smaller roads. You sit up and the air smells like dew, warmed by herbivore breath, clean, a little sweet. Pathogens are everywhere, of course. Viruses test new locks. Bacteria barter. Fungi file paperwork in the damp. But without barns, corrals, granaries, ships, or the close-packed rooms of winter towns, outbreaks fire, like grass in a drizzle, quick, bright, then out. Herds spread the risk thinly across kilometers. Predators prune the sick. Scavengers tidy. And fire from Section 7 writes neat breaks that a fever can't easily cross. Light joke 1, you attempt to social distance from a gnat. Then remember, the gnat didn't read the memo, and you were not copied on it anyway. You follow a line of rodent tracks to a burrow entrance fringed with chewed grass and flea gossip. Yersinia pestis. The bacterium you once met in footnotes as Black Death still circulates in wild rodent systems, marmots on Asian plateaus, ground squirrels and prairie dogs on plains gerbils, where steppe turns to dry rumor. Fleas are buses, burrows are suburbs. Predators are code enforcement. Sometimes a local flare will collapse a town of prairie dogs. Owls and coyotes will get a brief risky feast. Then the chains break in the geometry of space. What never arrives is the relay race of caravan ships and alley cats that in your other world turned a bacterium into a medieval drum. Historians still argue whether the 14th century Black Death was driven purely by Yersinia pestis or braided with other pathogens and transmission routes. Here, the debate is a story about a storm that never gathers. You shade your eyes and think about bats. Fruit bats hang from fig limbs like dark commas. Insectivorous cousins tack along the evening ceiling, mouse nimble. Viral families ride with them. Filoviruses Henopaviruses, coronaviruses, most of them behaving like polite tenants in long, co-evolved leases. Spillovers happen, and always have, but they tend to flash within bat colonies or cross briefly into carnivores that resolve the story by ending it. With no horses in paddocks, no Hendra detour, no pig sheds under duck ponds, no live animal markets, knitting species that never shared air before the chains stay short. You take polite steps past a cave mouth anyway, because you are not trying to star in a cautionary tale. Birds stitch their own epidemiology. Avian influenzas circulate in wild ducks and geese, like weather, subtle, seasonal, endlessly revised. Without poultry barns to amplify and remix strains, the drama rarely spikes. Swans get sick some winters. Eagles gossip about it. Then cold distance and a web of predators and scavengers close the loop. On the islands, where your other world delivered mosquitoes and barrels and plants and ballast water, the script reads differently here. Hawaii keeps its mountaintop honey creepers in the lowlands too, because there is no introduced avian malaria riding non-native culex. The forests ring with colors of sound you had only ever read about in past tense. You kneel at a pond, stitched by dragonflies, and think about the dilution effect. The idea that diversity can buffer disease by diverting vectors and thinning encounters with the most competent hosts. Sometimes it works like that. Sometimes it doesn't. Landscapes are opinionated. Beaver wetlands from Section 6 create mosquito nurseries, true, but they also employ legions of swallows bats, naho-nectid bugs, fish, and damselfly nymphs as local security. Malaria parasites still circulate in birds and primates. Trypanosomes still keep tsetse flies honest. Limelight games play in forests where ticks lobby for attention. What you don't get is a suburb so homogeneous that every tick finds the same naive host walking a leash dog along the same clipped edge of the same hedgerow. Quirky tidbit to fold into your sleeve. A bacterium called Wolbachia lives in many insects and rewrites love letters, skewing sex ratios, inducing parthenogenesis, even feminizing genetic males to suit its own transmission. In your old world, people learned to release Wolbachia-infected mosquitoes as a biocontrol for dengue and friends. Here, Wolbachia keeps its telenovela inside wasps and flies a million tiny soap operas where no human ever changes the channel. Somewhere under a leaf, a parasitoid wasp rolls her eyes at a reproductive curveball and gets on with the day. Fungi maintain their mysterious empire. Ophiocordyceps, the zombie whisperer, still persuades ants to clamp jaws onto leaves at a height and orientation that favors the fungus's reign of spores. The forest accepts the tiny choreography, the way it accepts woodpecker drumming part of the score. Amphibian chytrid disease, the notorious BD that in your timeline hammered frogs on several continents, has fewer tickets to fly without the pet trade bait buckets and global churn. It might still smolder in some watersheds. It might never reach others. White nose syndrome in bats, first noticed by people in 2006, in your world likely never hops oceans here without camper's gear and caving tourism ferrying the spore. Caves remain private libraries, not crowded reading rooms. Mainstream historical fact. To anchor your calm in the world you remember, smallpox became the first human disease eradicated, certified in 1980 by a quiet piece of paper and millions of careful vaccines. In this version, smallpox never learns the shape of a city and never invents the parade it needs to become famous. Measles, that virtuoso of crowded rooms, never spins out of rinderpest, because rinderpest never gorges in cattle herds, and people never gather enough children together, day after day, to keep the fire stoked. Cholera never does its 19th century tours of water pumps, because there are no pumps, No tenements, no steamships, connecting one bad bucket to a continent of mouths. You feel relief, like cool shade, down by a salt lick. Hooves come and go, cross, deer, boar, each leaving a trace of gut and skin, microbiome in dust and mud. Parasites pass among them in honest, slow circuits. Nematodes, flukes, coccidia. Predators take the thinned and the tired, which is brutal only if you forget that mercy here is distributed across the network, not concentrated in a hospital wing. You hear the wolves from Section 5 make their low conversational yips and know that carnivores are part of public health, whether anyone writes the policy or not. Light joke 2, you consider filing an insurance claim with the Department of Wolves and are told to take it up with Raven Customer Support, which is open at all hours and accepts payment in gossip. Marine diseases keep their underwater diaries. Corals still meet pathogens, especially in hot spells tied to climate cycles, but without the constant extra shove of a human-warmed ocean recovery is more common, and intervals between fevered years widen. Sea star wasting might flicker and fade in a basin, not roar across coasts in a single loud chapter. Oysters keep their filtering laundromats cleaner when no silt plumes or chemicals crash in from uplands. Hypoxia blooms shrink when rivers carry more songs than nutrients. The kelp forests where otters crack urchins remember the pocket from Section 9. Weather pulses of urchin recruitment and bounce back on the regular. Travel a little, and you'll see a different kind of quarantine geography doing what it's always done. Mountains keep hoof diseases in separate sentences. Deserts isolate rodent plagues long enough for fleas to run out of patience. Island channels keep rabies off archipelagos where bats mine their own maps. When a pathogen does cross via birdwind driftwood, the long step of a swimming mammal, it meets host communities not simplified by plows and fences, not distilled into acre upon acre of the same mouth. Epidemiologists in your other world debated whether civilization made us safer or simply changed the menu of risks. Here the answer feels smaller and kinder. The world runs lots of small experiments instead of a few spectacular ones. A primate troop might lose elders to a flare of something mean and invisible. The troop across the valley, out of sync by one fruiting season, does fine and repopulates the path. A duck marsh gets a hard winter, a thin spring, and then a fat summer. A coyote den loses 2 pups to a parasite, and the next year loses none. Nothing is under control, and nothing needs to be for the story to keep moving. By afternoon, you're standing in the patient cool of a beaver meadow, dragonflies cross-stitching air with blue and glass. You think of all the city epidemics that never wear no quarantines, no bells, no chalk marks, no hot headlines, and you don't feel triumphant so much as quiet. The beavers are on their rounds, the wolves patrolling the frogs, auditioning for dusk. You remember the termite citadels from our first night, the Kia drummers from Section 8, the mammoth wallows from Section 10. And you realize the same rule holds across all of them. Complexity is a kind of health. A breeze flips a leaf, and an ant reveals a tiny white thread of fungus like punctuation on a green page. You lean back, listen for the fan hum river in the distance, grasses talking at knee height, one raven saying something rude about your hat, and let the thought settle. In a world without us, disease is not a plot twist. It's background music, sometimes minor key, sometimes bright, always part of the score that leads everything eventually back to ordinary days. Light joke 3. You consider giving the mosquito a 5-star Yelp review for persistence, then decide you're not encouraging that kind of entrepreneurship. When evening finally folds over the meadow, nothing announces a crisis. Bats clock in. Swallows write their last cursive for the day. Somewhere upstream, a beaver tail says enough paperwork. You slow your breath to match the pond's small exhalations and feel how risk, like weather, becomes bearable when it's local, varied, and honest. The night hums. You hum back because that's what good neighbors do. Night leans in like a friendly curtain, and when it lifts a hem for you, the sky is not a ceiling. It's a roadmap written in cold fire. There's no sky glow, no aircraft stitching dotted lines, no satellites winking, the way impatient cities wink when they can't sleep. The Milky Way is a river again, milk only in name. Really, a salt road of 100 billion lanterns, and everything that moves on the ground or water seems to tilt its head to listen. You do too. Light joke 1, your thumb twitches to open a stargazing app, but out here, the app is 360 degrees free and refuses to buffer. The sand under your calves still remembers the sea from section 9. A crawler lifts her head above the first line of surf. Loggerhead turtle, barnacle-scratched eyes like old coins. She tastes the horizon's brightness, because hatchlings and mothers both read light, the dark of land, the shimmer of sea. And she also reads something deeper, something you can't feel without an instrument. Earth's magnetic field, a faint, planet-sized whisper. Mainstream anchor to tuck in your pocket experiments in your other world showed that young loggerheads imprint on the magnetic signature of their natal beach and use a magnetic map to cross oceans, and years later return astonishingly close to where they began. Here without port, glare to confuse horizons, the map is clean, and the sea writes her a straight invitation. You watch her draw a wide semicircle with her foreflippers and slip into the black, like a sentence concluding itself politely. Turn inland, and the sky hardens with stars until it feels crowded enough to have rules. It does. Indigo. Buntings point themselves by the slow pivot around Polaris. Warblers and thrushes climb into cool night rivers and chip the air with contact notes, stitching moving highways between continents. In your old world, little paper cones called Emlyn funnels proved that star patterns cue migratory direction birds in planetariums orient correctly when shown the rotating sky, and get confused when the rotation stops. You don't need the lab tonight. You can hear the invisible traffic in the small, sweet syllables passing overhead, 1,000 soft arguments about altitude and tailwinds. At a dune's crown, something tiny and earnest is performing astronomical slapstick. A dung beetle balances on its ball, does a full turn under the Milky Way, and then trundles off in a straight line, like a determined philosopher with groceries. Quirky tidbit time. Some dung beetles really do navigate by the Milky Way's glow. When the sky is washed out, their lines wobble, but under this river of light, they roll true. You give a little salute to the smallest celestial navigator you'll meet tonight, and it ignores you with the dignity of someone who has an agenda. Aurora arrives like breath held too long and then released in color. Green first, then a raisin purple at the edge, the curtains folding and unfolding as if the planet were ironing its own nightgown. The sound, if there is one, lives in your ribs like wind over harp strings. Solar wind meets magnetosphere, and the poles answer with light that once kept storytellers employed. It still does, you just don't have storytellers. Historians still argue whether ancient navigators prioritized star swells and seabird flights in different orders across Polynesia, and whether the first landfalls in Aotearoa were single, audacious voyages or a braided series of arrivals. Either way, the sky and sea taught the first maps. In this world, wayfinding schools stay inside feathers and skulls rather than canoes and chants. But the curriculum hasn't changed much. You follow a river, you now know how to read. Thank the beavers from Section 6 for every silver bend, and watch bats flex their sun compasses in miniature. Not only birds do clock math, monarch-like migrants take the sun and correct for time of day. Beetles swivel to polarization patterns that streak the twilight dome. Even nocturnal insects that avoid the open use the faint green of airglow as a reference. Light joke 2. You briefly consider listing astronomer on your resume because you can now identify Orion Scorpius and one very busy beetle, but the ravens from Section 8 would almost certainly mark up your CV with red pen. On a salt pan still warm from yesterday's sun, you lie back and let meteors cross your peripheral vision, tiny coated mail from old comets. The Perseids are punctual, the Geminids too. A nightjar lifts, skims, folds back into the sans vowel. Far to the nor, geese rehearse their consonants. The V they draw is a tool aerodynamics shared. Leaders swap when necks grow tired. In headwinds they drop lower. Under stars, they match what their elders showed them, and what their heads insist is true, that north is the dark cup of the horizon in spring and south is the warm bowl in autumn. The planet's magnetism becomes a character once you notice its moods. Storms rattle it, quiet years smooth it, local anomalies curl the lines like a cowlick. Robins and warblers sense inclination and intensity, some at the level of single photons through chemical reactions in eye proteins called cryptochromes. If the radical pair model is right, some via teeny magnetite crystals lodged in tissues if that model is right, or both if the world prefers yes and over picking one. Historians still argue whether radical pair chemistry alone can explain the precision seen in birds, or whether magnetite-based receptors provide a second sensor. Either way, the instruments sit in skulls and eyes update constantly and never need charging. You revisit the synchronous fireflies by the river from Section 6 and find them keeping exquisite time again. Not seduced astray by lamps that never got invented. Their pulses align in bands and then ripple backward, a stadium wave, performed by beings that weigh less than lint. Moths practice crosswind tacks against invisible odor plumes, scent lanes that make city detours look clumsy. On desert flats, horned larks nest in pale bowls and memorize the sun's angles as if they got graded on them. Oceanward grunions still align, spawning with full moon tides, and corals broadcast gametes during brief clockwork fireworks, lunar calendars printed in calcium. Above the timberline, where the air tastes like crushed quartz, you see ungulates rehearse vertical migrations, the daily up and down commutes to graze and nap, but also the seasonal ones when snow lines redraw pastures. Pikas stash hay in rock libraries with sun as drier logic, and marmots blow whistles that bounce off sky-colored talus. The path you walk becomes a syllabus of routes learned over bodies and years elk trails that pour into passes, pronghorn lanes, across sage like ghost highways, monarch corridors, over mountain saddles that no one named but everyone remembers with their legs. Mainstream historical fact. Because your brain still likes pegs, Arctic terns in your other world make the longest known migration pole to pole and back, roughly 70,000 kilometers per year. By recent tracking chasing summer the way a good gardener chases bloom. In this world, nothing stops them except weather and the need to eat. There's no fishing line to snare, no night-lit trawler to lure a detour, no oil sheen to erase a foraging ground's scent. The sky is a clean equation again, and the birds solve it out loud. You pass a ridge where bighorn sheep walk the horizon like careful ideas, and then down into a basin, where the silence is so complete you can hear the small flight calls above your head as migrating warblers drop for a snack and climb again. In cities, those calls bounced off glass, and we learned too late how many lives a skyline could cost. Here, no buildings happen, so no corrections are required. The only collision you witness is a leaf politely meeting the ground. When the aurora quiets and the Milky Way looks less busy, only because your eyes got used to abundance, you try a game, close your eyes, and navigate by sound and wind. River to your left, cricket choir to your right. A faint, stone-cold smell that means snow higher up. It's difficult, delicious, and humbling. Everything you've met. The Kia drummers, the elephant, cartographers, the raven, editorial board, the beetle, astronomers, does a version of this all the time, with sensors you do and don't share. Historians still argue whether ancient Mediterranean sailors relied more on star height tables or on wind roses passed mouth to mouth, whether Vikings used sunstones to read polarized light on cloudy days, whether Micronesian stick charts encoded swells or islands first. You smile at the arguments, the way you smiled at the beaver engineers and the termite architects. In earlier sections, the point isn't which trick wins. The point is that the world has a million tricks, and mind, human or not, finds its way by layering them until the path clicks. Light joke 3. A troop of geese passes low, and you're tempted to file a noise complaint until you realize the complaint box is a hollow in a willow, and the clerk is a wren who takes payment in crumbs and gossip. You offer both, get a scolding receipt, and feel unfairly good about your customer service experience. When you finally lie down, spine to sand, palms open to dew, the fan hum of the planet returns, reeds combing breeze frogs carding the dark, a far mammoth herd from Section 10 playing bass with their feet. Overhead, Orion tilts west. Scorpius doesn't show because you're in the wrong season, and the Pleiades look like someone spilled a tiny dish of salt and never cleaned it up. Your own migratory map is simpler. Follow the sound of water rest where the ground is kind. Wake when birds write sentences into the light. The sky will still be there in the morning, folded and waiting. And the next night, it will unfold again, not because you asked, but because that's what it does. And everything that knows how to read it will be there turning pages with wings. You stay on your back until the sand cools, and in that slow shiver of temperature, you feel the planet change paragraphs. The sky you just read will file itself into crystals of ice, into rings of tree growth, into thin lake varves that count winters like beads. Without us, there's no sudden footnote made of plastic and fly ash, no aluminum bouquet, no concrete reefs leaking rebar into sediment. The Book of Earth keeps its long font, and you get to listen as it turns 100,000 quiet pages. You sit up and run your fingertips through a ribbon of wind-blown dust caught at the dune's base. Loess powder from far deserts sifted across continents, a soft timekeeper that locks chill years into pale layers. On the steppe where you met the mammoths, that powder builds slow hills. Roots bind it. Burrows lace it. An old glacier's breath becomes soil. Faraway lakes etch thin dark light pairs in winter and summer varves, tight as thread. Mainstream anchor to tuck beside your heartbeat. Geologists use such annual layers, varves, and ice core bands to count back through Pleistocene winters and interglacial summers, reading ancient atmospheres from trapped bubbles. Here, those bubbles still say seasons rather than smokestacks. Under a cliff, a bat cave drips with stalactites that look like pensive candles. Water lines the chamber. takes a breath through limestone leaves, a coin of calcite. Speleothems are patient seismographs. Tilt a little, and they notice dry a little, and they write it down in a paler stripe. Outside, a river idles across its floodplain. Remember the meanders from Section 6, and every avulsion pencils a new lobe into the delta. The shelf beyond will catch those sands, turn them to stone, then lift them someday into Badlands, where a raven from Section 8 will laugh at your hat again. Light joke 1. You consider bequeathing your hat to the future fossil record, then realize sedimentary layers do not honor personal requests or questionable fashion. Ice takes its deep breath and lets it out. Because there's no late abrupt greenhouse lurch, the glacial metronome runs closer to its old schedule. Summers lean cool in high latitudes. Winters bank snow. Ice sheets step forward like polite guests with heavy shoes. Forests step south and down. Grass steps north and up. The rising and falling of sea level redraws coasts in the same tidy handwriting you saw earlier. Continental shelves bloom into windswept plains in low stands, then flood back to become fish nurseries when the ice relaxes. Historians still argue whether in our other history, human-released CO2 and methane have already delayed the next glaciation by tens of thousands of years. Here, the argument is moot. The orchestra follows Milankovitch, and the brass comes in when the score says so. Every age leaves its calling card. When dinosaurs signed off, they left a spike of iridium and shocked quartz, the Chicxulub kiss, sealed in clay. That's your big mainstream historical fact. A 66-million-year-old boundary, bright with extraterrestrial metal, marks the KPG extinction in rocks worldwide. In the slice you're walking through, the markers are different and quieter charcoal drifts from lightning fires. Section 7, pollen, flips between spruce and oak shells, archive the ocean's pH in their carbonates. No technofossils, no radioactive tracer from mid-century bomb tests, no global chicken bone bloom. The Anthropocene doesn't arrive because its authors never do. Historians still argue whether the Anthropocene merits formal epic status even in our timeline. In this one, the stratigraphy never offers the case. Volcanoes still write plot twists. A high cold morning goes sideways when a mountain in the tropics unzips itself and speaks ash into the stratosphere. Sunlight dims for a year or two. Sunsets go theatrical. Tree rings whisper thin. Toba-level events, think of the caldera in Sumatra, will happen on their schedule, or not at all, independent of whether anyone is around to speculate about population bottlenecks. Here, bottlenecks are for elephants rerouting around ash fans, and for corvids rehearsing new scavenger etiquette. Ash falls into a lake and becomes varves thick with punctuation. In a century, trout forget then remember. In a millennium, the ash is a line you can touch with a fingertip and feel the world's brief cough. Some changes you can't smell or see because they happen underfoot with the patience of stone. Plates continue their slow courtesies, subduction tucks ocean floor under continents. New basalt pumps from ridges. Old mountains lower their shoulders, grain by grain, and settle into plains. The Himalaya keeps its own stubborn appointment with the sky and rain, thanks it by making rivers that thank the sea. If you want a quirk to keep you smiling, there's a volcano growing in the dark east of the Hawaiian chain. A seamount that, given a few 100,000 years, becomes an island with its own birds and jokes. In your other world, it answers to Kamayahuakanaloa. Here, it has no name because nobody is taking the minutes. Light joke 2. You briefly apply for the unpaid position of person who names mountains, but the hiring committee, 2 albatrosses, and a very serious crab rejects you for lack of wingspan. Termite towers the air-conditioned balconies you've used all story slump into hard iron-rich knobs, ferrocrete, on the way to stone. Beaver dams accrete silt until the meadow drowns and becomes peat. Peat waits out a million rains, and if it gets buried deep and warm enough, begins the slow apprenticeship toward coal. Whale falls sink and feed a city of mouths, then leave bony scaffolds that invite minerals in. The blueprint for future fossils looks not like a museum plan, but like a party invitation stuck in the mud. You keep seeing the same pattern. What's alive now writes a draft that rock will copy in its slow, exquisite hand later. A glacier stubs its toe on a ridge and drops a moraine. A lake drinks from that pile of stones and becomes a blue bead you can see from space. A shorebird writes across it in little 3-toed cursive. In the desert varnish paints glossy chocolate on sun-facing rocks, a micron-a-century patina baked by microbes and manganese. Quirky tidbit, in some drylands lizard tracks and raindrop pits fossilized together in Aeolian sandstones, a photo that took 1 windy hour and a 500,000 years. You tuck that away because it's useful to remember that time likes to juxtapose, and geology is fond of both jokes and patience. Sea level seesaws open and close straits, remixing island biogeography with every swing. Remember? Sundaland from Section 3. It breathes again. Peninsulas become archipelagos, become peninsulas in a rhythm so old that forests have travel bags packed. Coral reefs keep their vertical chase, drowning, founding, stepping landward as accommodation space opens. Mangrove mudlocks carbon into black scrolls. Salt marshes grow upward, a millimeter at a time. Punctuation only fiddler crabs can hear. Without dredges, the estuary handwriting stays legible. Without seawalls, barrier islands roll obediently, even endearingly, across their own shadows. In ice cores, bubbles snip audio of ancient air CO2, rising with warming oceans, and falling with greedy ones, but not the modern hockey stick sprint. Methane bobs with wetlands gossip, and the breath of termites, not rice paddies. If you zoom out to the whole quaternary, the signal looks like a heartbeat at rest. Zoom in, and there's drama enough. Dansgaard Ushker flickers in the North Heinrich layers where ice rafts dropped stones like confetti into the abyss. Historians still argue whether the bipolar seesaw, the North chill, South warm seesaw, leads or follows in these dances. You listen and decide the music is what matters, not which foot starts the step. Life edits as rock edits. Those mammoths you walked beside Section 10 scrawl step into snow. Then when ice leans hard, contract into refuges and wait the beat out. Down coast kelp. Section 9 documents storminess in broken fronds and beach rack. Upcurrent foraminifera swap species with tiny thresholds that calibrate temperature so well you could almost wear them like a wristwatch if the wristwatch took 1,000,000 years to read. Elephant Section 8. Redraw savannas by pulling young trees. Fire Section 7 primes seed banks and writes charcoal notes for lake mud to archive. The termites' air shafts, the beavers' ponds, the ravens' caches, the whales' iron confetti. All these leave echoes rock can keep. Every now and then, you put your ear to ground and swear you can hear peridotite drinking CO2 serpentinization in deep fractures. Slow, geologic chemistry, doing the climate work you used to want machines to do. Basalts, weather, and steel carbon. Mountains climb, then become sand. The sand becomes rock, and the rock returns the carbon on a much slower schedule. Your impatience adorable in daily life, catastrophic in policy, has nothing to push on here. The metronome refuses to rush. Light joke 3. You attempt to draft a petition asking the next interglacial to please arrive with a nice mild June for picnics. The petition is eaten by an obliging goat on Section 5's ridgeline, and the scheduling committee, eccentricity, obliquity, precession, does not accept public comment. The place where we would have made a golden spike, the Anthropocene boundary, in some riverbank or lake core, stays quietly unremarkable. No bomb pulse radionuclides, no global soot from industry. No microfibers frizzed into unhelpful snow. No synchronous chicken bone bloom in our world. Gallus domesticus becomes a serious candidate technofossil. The Holocene is just another interglacial, with a beautiful chorus, not a prelude that got hijacked. When this warm window closes, it does so without monuments. Forest belts drift. Deltas wander. The beavers file a new set of permits with the water table and keep building anyway. You take one last slow tour of a future outcrop. In your mind, an alternation of flood silts and oxbow muds. A sharp pale ash from a temperamental stratovolcano. A buried forest turned to brown coal. A thin, glossy charcoal lane from a century of lightning-busy summers. A coral rubble bed testifying to storm clusters that arrived on a cycle longer than memory, but shorter than mountain ranges. A less cap settled over it all, like fine sugar. And in a pocket, a mammoth tusk turned to mineral. A raven metatarsus, light as a dried reed. A beaver stick with beaver teeth written neatly along its edge. The page turns another page, follows, and none of them require us to make sense. When night folds back over the dune, the fan hum you've been hearing since Section 1 returns river reed insect, a far surf that never clocks out. The deep future is not a cliff you fall from. It's a long hallway with windows. Ice walks in, sits a while, leaves. Forests move their furniture. Reefs climb stairs. Volcanoes clear their throats, and then go to bed for centuries. You let the hallway lengthen until your breathing finds the same slow interval as the ice core's bubbles and the lake varve's stripes. The rock will remember. The rock always does. Your job tonight is easier. Press your ear to the ground, say thank you, and let the page turn without you needing to sign it. You choose a road that isn't a road, a thread of bent grass, a rift of scent, and follow it the way you've learned to follow rivers and stars. The savanna opens with the confidence of a stage that knows its lines. Ahead, a coalition of African wild dogs braids itself into a moving net, each body, a metronome, each ear, a satellite dish. A scout flows right, another drifts left, and the center pulses like a heart. When the antelope breaks, the chorus tightens, not frenzy choreography. You don't hear commands, you hear breath. Ravens from earlier circle above, like editors fact-checking in real time. Light joke 1. You raise a hand as if to volunteer. I can be morale. And a dog glances over with the tolerant look of someone who appreciates the enthusiasm, but has deadlines. At the water's rim, a matriarch elephant angles her shadow across glitter. She pauses, eyes half closed, foot pressed into soft mud. And you can almost see the map unroll behind her eyes. Old water in bad years, thorny corridors to avoid in calving season, a salt lick that made sense for her mother's mother. Mainstream anchor for your inner notebook. Elephant families are matriarchal. Older females lead, and their social memory improves calf survival during droughts, a finding repeated in studies that look like love letters to grandmothers. The herd trusts the pause, then moves exactly wrong-footing a lioness who thought she'd predicted the line. You drift south, where the sea pulls a long breath up the shore. A black and white blade cleaves the surface orca, and then another, and the water becomes a ledger of fins. The pod fans out, lines up with an ice edge, and rehearses a trick older than harbor's wave wash. They surf a synchronized swell that undercuts a flow. A seal skids, surprised by physics. Lunch is served with a gravity garnish. You watch the old female, the one with nicks in her fin, hang back a beat, then lead the next pass, as if she is the metronome. Quirky tidbit to keep some orca populations possess hunting traditions so specific: stingray flips, shark tonic immobilization, kelp. Calving, babysitting, that biologists talk about ecotypes with distinct cuisines and dialects. Historians still argue whether calling these inherited skills culture flatters us or simply admits that the word belongs to anyone who can pass a lesson across time. The reef just offshore writes its own minutes. A grouper shimmies head down near a crevice, where a moray rests, then jerks toward a rock, twice as theatrical. Come with me, that even you understand. The eel unspools like a drawn thread, follows the pointer, and the two become one. Hunting sentence grouper, blocking the open moray, probing the labyrinth. This interspecific duet has been filmed and debated in your other world. Here it looks like a neighborhood chore chart working fine without meetings. You snort laugh into your sleeve and manage not to scare the crabs. Forests fold back over you with green gravity. In a clearing that smells of sap and shade, a troop of bonobos arranges its afternoon greeting, with soft-eyed ease mediating with food and touch. High above, a chimp mother reseats a child's small fingers on a termite probe, patience braided into patience. A juvenile copies badly, then better. Baboons pass on the ground like commuters who know every shortcut, pausing at a date palm, whose fruits have taught generations of stomachs and schedules. Historians still argue whether ancestral hominins had we existed here would have looked more like chimps in their territorial politics, or bonobos in their conflict-dissolving preferences. In this version, the answer remains in hands, not hypotheticals. You take the beaver road into wetland light silver reed filament dragonfly blue. The pond from section 6 has become a plaza. Herons pace like old magistrates. Rails knit the margins with whispers. Turtles load sunlight onto their shells like good accounting. In a side channel, otters run the kind of relay that would set a human pool on fire, with applause, slide dive pop, with a fish handoff under a willow root. Up in the alder fringe, a flock of waxwings passes a berry person to person like a toast. This is not idle. It's logistics. It's how sugar moves through feathers, how seeds catch rides, how the map redraws itself without press releases. Islands file their own cases for how to live together. On a Kiwi hillside that wears fog like a shawl, kakapo heavy parrots, with faces like curious herbs, move in the slow confidence of birds that forgot flight and found affection instead. A male booms from a bowl he's carved into the earth, a bass note you feel in the sternum. Females shop for songs as much as for genes. In the canopy, Kia from Section 8 run a workshop on applied curiosity, untying knots. You didn't tie, testing latches the way mathematicians test conjectures joyfully with crumbs. Light joke 2. One steals the idea of your hat and replaces it with a slightly worse hat made of leaves. You file a complaint with the Raven editorial board and are told to cherish the lesson. Shorelines keep time with breath. You revisit the Matupas on the Amazon, remember those raft islands, and find capybaras afloat like armchairs at a river party. Jacanas step between lily pads, chicks tucked under wing like misplaced toes. Out in the blue, a humpback mother rises with her calf, and you hear the road that's made of sound, the long vowels that call and answer across a basin. In your other life, you learned whales trade songs that trend like pop hits. Here, the phrase song-led migration feels less metaphor than method pods drift toward conspecific voices. Calves learn roots by ear and flank, and entire corridors are held open by habit you can hear. Some societies look like a single body composed of many bodies. Leafcutter ants ferry green moons home on invisible roads. At the nest mouth, a worker snips your hair width offering into sectors, and a sister plants each piece in fungus like a farmer who worships cleanliness. Termite citadels, your favorite balconies, breathe in a way architects still envy, exchanging heat and gas with a lattice of vents so perfect it makes a lecture of every breeze. In a shaded corner, a weaver bird crafts a nest that looks like laughter frozen into a basket. A female inspects, tears it down, and prompts a rebuild with the cool authority of a juried show. Matriarchy takes more than one shape. Spotted hyenas, power walking with shoulders higher than hips, sort their lives under females who inherit rank and grant boons sparingly. Their dens are gossip hubs, their greetings, diplomatic knots, their hunts, testaments to endurance. Mainstream fact to steady your footing: hyena societies are among the most female-dominant in mammals, with clear rank lines and coalition politics that graduate into elaborate lifelong charts. You skirt the den to avoid causing a scandal and trip over your own feet instead, which causes a scandal anyway. Light joke 3. You attempt a curtsy. A cub giggles in hyena, and the moment is saved. Even snow speaks in groups. On a high plain, with wind teeth, musk oxen form a circle, calves tucked inside horns outward, a living fortress that rotates duties with the fairness of a good union. Reindeer map 1,000 miles of lichen memory and pass the map through hooves. When ice crusts the ground, they listen with their feet for the thin places. Arctic foxes draft their roots into the white like small poets and are paid in lemmings rather than applause. You start to notice that history never belonged to us alone. The savannah hunt you watched is a dynasty of tactics passed mother to pup and aunt to niece. The elephant's itinerary is a braid of drought years and flood years archived in a brain that weighs as much as your backpack full of old worries. The orca move you saw is a chapter in a cookbook that lists the ocean as author. The grouper-moray handshake is a treaty more reliable than most you've read. The reef choir, the wetland toast, the island boom, the grassland parliament. They're all annals, just not carved in stone. Historians still argue whether storytelling requires words. You incline your head toward drumming cockatoos and humming gorillas and decide story is any pattern that survives its own afternoon. By dusk, you've walked 100 societies without crossing a city. Your feet know more trails than your mouth knows nouns. You can find water by watching doves find weather, by reading swallows, find safety by standing where elephants stood and listening to what the air remembers. The fan hum that has shadowed you since Section 1 tightens into a close, friendly purr wind, combing reed frogs sawing silk, a far wolf paragraphing the dark. You settle into grass that smells of tea and sun, and a little of yesterday's mammoth. You don't summarize. You participate. You don't crown anything. You witness. The night presses gently at the edges, and the map in your chest stops fluttering like a trapped moth and lies flat finally like a page ready for the last paragraph. You wake with the sense that the world has already begun without you and is kindly saving you a seat anyway. Grass leans against your ankle like a note folded once and passed in class. Far off, the elephants from the watering place put a last punctuation mark on the morning, 2 low rumbles, then quiet. A raven does its editorial cough and approves the weather. You stand, you breathe, you let your shoulders remember how to be shelves for calm. Meaning you realize isn't something you install. It's something you notice, like dew, like shade, like the way a breeze goes gentle the moment you decide to listen. You walk without hurrying, and the day organizes itself around you. The beaver meadow from Section 6 has new signatures. Otter scribbles, a fox's tongue tip of tracks, sedges slicked by last night's dew. Dragonflies patrol like blue paperclips that learned physics. The pond is busy delegating this leaf to a mayfly, that beam of light to a minnow, this perfectly round bubble to your patience. You'll never be mayor here, and that's the relief you get to be a citizen of an order that doesn't require your oath or your speech. Your job is to be porous, to let river and reed and feather pass through your attention unbent. The thought sneaks in your other life. People made museums of memory. Mainstream fact to anchor that musing: the painted caves at Chauvet and on Sulawesi, charcoal horses' ochre handprints reach back more than 40,000 years in the archaeological record, proof that humans love to press stories into stone. Here, the galleries are different elk carve their minutes into mud at crossings. Humpbacks publish in water and air. Termites, our patient architects, draft climate notes in pillars that breathe. Nothing in this museum needs a guard. Everything in it is already home. You taste resin in the shade, and the forest answers with a dozen small economies. A troop of monkeys revises its route, picking figs with the restraint of people who know tomorrow will also ask for breakfast. A pangolin lifts like a pine cone that decided to walk, pauses to blink, and then decides you are not an agenda item. Quirky tidbit for your pocket: pangolin scales are made of keratin, the same stuff as your nails, but in your old world, that plain fact didn't prevent myths from assigning those scales imaginary powers. Here, power is measured in the precision of an ant's tunnel, the width of a sunbeam, the mercy of shade at noon. Downwind. Wild dogs rehearse the day's geometry, their breathing a metronome you could hang a lullaby on. Upwind. A marsh writes commas of mist above warm water. You feel the fan hum that has followed you. Since our first night, the gentle machine of wind and reed and insects settle into your ribs like a soft engine. The idea that life needs you to explain it begins to feel silly, like a toddler trying to narrate the ocean. Historians still argue whether the grand progress story, a single staircase, climbing inevitably to us, was a 19th century invention or a patchwork of older hopes. Out here, the question falls apart because stairs aren't useful in grass. Paths are, and there are a million, and none of them require a podium. Past noon, you follow a stuttering line of white into shade and find the Kia workshop, open for business green mechanics, investigating a log with the enthusiasm of interns who have never been told to stop asking why. One Kia picks up a shell and taps it against wood as if paging a bartender. Another flips a strip of bark and looks meaningfully in your direction, like you seeing this light joke. One, you give the bird your most serious nod, the dignified nod of someone who definitely holds a clipboard, and it immediately steals the imaginary pen from behind your ear. You think of the grouper Murray handshake offshore, of dolphins wearing sponges like oven mitts, of octopuses caching apartments in the fold of skin that passes for a pocket. You think of bison darkening a horizon and leafcutter ants turning a forest floor into an economy of green moons. You've been worrying, perhaps, that meaning demands monuments, but the monuments are right here, moving, eating, teaching, birthing, dying, and leaving room. You've also been worrying, tell the truth, that without us, there'd be no audience. Then you remember nothing in this world performs, everything participates. Purpose is not applause, it's continuity. Even the questions are part of the softness now. Was that eagle stooping on skill or luck? Were those whale codas a grammar or a good melody? Did the fire that walked the ridge make room or merely take it? You'll never settle any of it, and somehow the not settling is the pillow. What history you still carry shrinks to the size of a pocket stone and warms the same way when held. Light joke 2. You offer your stone to a raven for peer review. The raven accepts your submission, eats a beetle instead, and declares the work tasty but inconclusive. Sometime toward evening, the mammoths appear again. Not a miracle, just punctuality with hair. The calves practice trunk tricks, the aunts practice patience, and the matriarch practices the long, dignified nap you secretly crave. Their tusks catch a color the day forgot it had. You feel not for the first time that value is mostly attention arranged into a shape. Stand here long enough, and even your heartbeat learns to whisper. In a swale by the river, you kneel to drink and notice the tiny astronomer from section 12, a dung beetle rolling a prize with the gravity of a priest. It does a pirouette under daylight this time, lining up with the sun instead of the Milky Way, and sets off with theatrical certainty. Somewhere beyond the reeds, cranes lean their voices into the dusk, and somewhere offshore, a whale stretches a vowel as if tasting the moon. Meaning isn't scarce here. It's thick as pollen. Your job is only to breathe without scattering it. The world begins putting chairs on tables. Fireflies light a few last dots along a willow. Frogs warm up something that sounds like silk being sawn. Bats clock in. You step onto the termite balcony one last time and look over everything. You've met the wolves who stayed wolves, the cats who kept their patience, the reefs that refused to become quiet, the rivers that refused to become straight. You remember that in cities, people once scheduled sunrises with alarms. Here, sunrise schedules you. Historians still argue whether nature is a modern category invented by printers and poets, or a habit that simply went unnamed for a very long time. Either way, this habit tucks you in without asking your identity. What you have learned by ear, by nose, by listening with your feet, is not the moral of a fable, but the practice of being porous. You are allowed to pass through a place without owning it. You are allowed to keep company with a shore or a herd and leave them unexplained. You are allowed to go to sleep before the questions finish dressing. Light joke 3. You inform the moon you'll be outsourcing worry to the wolves, and it being overbooked approves the transfer without comment. So you lie back. The fan hum rises river on gravel wind in reed insect wings stitching shut the day. Orion remembers his line. The Pleiades spill like salt, and no one cleans it up. In a minute, you'll slide down into the kind of sleep that feels like a lake forgetting wind. But before you go, you give the night your small vow to carry gentleness like a pocket tool, to notice more than you name, to let meaning be the background music. It has always been steady and sufficient, whether or not anyone claps. Let the air soften its edges around you, and let your breath lengthen until each inhale feels like stepping into a warm room where someone has already drawn the curtains. The ground holds you like a sentence holds a word placed necessary unforced. You don't have to narrate the next minutes. They will narrate themselves. Imagine the beaver meadow in late blue evening. The water barely moving the alder leaves whispering yes to a wind that can't be bothered to cross the whole pond. Imagine the whales you can't see anymore, keeping their slow appointments beneath the dark, and the reef saving you a seat you'll never need. If a thought insists on staying, give it a small chair and a cup of quiet. If a worry shows up in scuffed shoes, Let the wolves walk it to the property line and send it home. If the day tries to replay itself, breathe in once for the tide coming, once for the tide going, and let the film slip its sprockets. You are not a border guard. You're a night breeze, passing easily through reeds. Let the fan hum, the one we found on the first night and kept finding in rivers and forests and at the lip of the sea, become the whole room. Its wind and grass, its insect wing, its distant surf, it's your own pulse at quarter speed. Every sound now is round. Every edge is sanded. Every bright thing is wrapped for morning. Should the stars need your attention, they'll tap politely at the window of your closed eyes. Most likely, they'll take care of themselves. That's the lesson and the lullaby the world is practiced at going on. Now, let the breath go even longer. Count only if counting pleases you. Picture the mammoths standing as windbreaks in the snow, calves tucked in. Picture kelp rising and bowing in black water unhurried. Picture the termite tower cooling your cheek like a clay pillow. The list can end anywhere because every end is only a pause. When the pause grows large enough to hold you, step into it. Stay as long as you like. The night is already keeping watch.